Sergeant Sledge sounded so much cooler than,
Captain Sledge. I mean,
yeah, but I was like, Sergeant Sledge sounds like a G.I. Joe character. Yeah. I joined in 99. Bill Clinton was president. I was like, I'm going to pay for college this way. Chicks love a dude in uniform. I'm outside the wire almost every single day. We're interrogating people, gathering intelligence. We got injured, we got wounded, I'm screaming. And I'm like, oh my God, we're gonna die. This is it. And that's like when the fear like really hit me. We need to know about the humanity and the complexity and the barbarity of combat. And we don't know enough. And these stories are not told for us to either learn from it or avoid it because you guys stay silent. I don't think I did anything particularly too heroic. I think I was just doing my job.
Ladies and gentlemen, as always, it's both an honor and a pleasure to welcome my next guest to the podcast. Spent 11 years in the U.S. Army, primarily in the Special Operations community with the PsyOps Command, which...
Civil Affairs, actually.
Yeah, Civil Affairs and PsyOps, which we're going to dig deep into. Deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. He was in Ramadi in 2006. He was awarded the Bronze Star, Purple Heart, and 2 Army Comms. He's a big advocate for mental health and veterans issues, raising awareness and support for those struggling with PTSD and other combat-related conditions. He holds certifications in crisis response, trauma care, and suicide prevention. And he's the author of Where Cowards Go to Die, which is about combat and reintegration into civilian life. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the stage, Ben the Hammer Sledge. You had to have been called that a million times, right?
I was.
Fucking Sledgehammer.
Yeah. Sledgehammer, Sledge. But most people just call me Sledge.
Is that a sex thing? Should it be? Fucking jackhammer?
I guess. I don't know, man. Yeah. I mean, my daughter, she's going to get it because she's in jiu-jitsu and smashing everybody right now.
Oh, no shit. How old is she?
She's just turned 8.
Oh, wow. Yeah. How long has she been grappling?
About 6 months now.
Oh, shit. So, that's awesome. That's such a good sport for kids to get in. What's the last full book that you've read?
Oh, man. I'm always reading one. Last full book that I read.
Like the last one that you finished.
Lightbringer by Pierce Brown. It's one of my favorite series. It's the Red Rising series.
Fiction?
Yeah, fiction. Yeah. But I'm literally reading The Anxious Generation right now by Jonathan Haidt. I mean, I usually am reading or listening to 4 books at the same time. Yeah.
That's interesting. I can't do that. Like for me, it's got to be one at a time. I can't have half. I mean, I may not finish a book, but I won't start another one while I'm still fucking with one. What's something you wish you were better at?
Jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. How long have you been grappling?
Oh man. I just got into it about 3 months ago. I had done some prior to. I've always been a martial artist, and I'm combining that with Muay Thai. And then I have my black belt in Kyokushin karate, which is like what George St. Pierre fought in. And it's just, it's such a mental game. And when I'm grappling with, of course, all these other white belts, I'm just like, I know immediately when I've screwed up. Yeah. Just like that. I'm like, there we go. I'm getting armbarred.
Yeah. Is it, do you train at a franchise gym, or is it a local?
No, a local boutique one. Yeah.
If time travel were possible, where and when would you go and why?
Ooh, that's a good one. Just because I'm a fantasy and science fiction nerd, I'd probably go back to like the medieval eras as far as knight stuff. I'm really fascinated by, I don't know if you've seen like these YouTube videos, and like Mythbusters tried to dispel this, but like archery back then was way more advanced than like what we can do now, where they were doing like trick shots and everything. You read about it, and that stuff's just kind of always fascinated me. Then again, like that's also the dark ages, so things are terrible. But if I could have all the knowledge that I have now and then go back to that time period,
that'd be the deal.
Yeah.
I saw I can't remember the YouTube channel, but it's a guy that talks about kind of the crossover of where tribal tribal raised athletes now are dominating sports like marathon runners, all the Dagestanis and MMA, et cetera. And like growing up, like in the mountains, functional strength, same with there's still a farming culture here in the United States that's similarly like you see, being from Iowa, there's some corn-fed fucking farm boys that, from the time they could walk were milking cows and fucking throwing hay around and,
yeah, they're big too.
yeah, and
They're
just
big old boys.
Fucking tough bastards. But the same guy did this little bit on, I think it was Comanche Native Americans and their ability to, from an archery standpoint, riding bareback, shooting fucking bow and arrows on the move. But the one of the more impressive things that isn't talked about much is the actual draw strength that's required to pull that fucking bow back. And they were saying like they have some bows from back then still that they use some I can't remember the name of the wood or the tree that the bark that they pull it from, but like they were having strong men and bodybuilders trying to pull it back and they couldn't fucking pull it back. It's just like, man. But if you think about it, kind of to your point, it's if that's how you grow up and that's all you're doing, there's no TV, there's no school, there's like your entire life is built around hunting. Right. If you're a young male growing up in Native American culture or, some sort of tribal thing where everything you do, it's the same with Spartan warriors, if they, from 5 years old, all they're doing is learning to fight. But I'm equally fascinated by it. Do you have a favorite quote?
I do. I have a couple. Oh, man. I've always loved John Stuart Mill's. I read a lot of philosophy. I liked his where he talks about the decayed and degraded sense of morality, where you think nothing is worth fighting for. And I can't remember it off the top of my head, but it just shows the importance of having things that you are willing to fight for and to stand up for. Yeah. I always like the H.L. Mencken quote, "Every man must be tempted at times to spit on his hand." So it's the black flag and begin slitting through. Yeah. It's kind of dark, but I'm just like, Yeah,
to me, I think it all boils down to everybody has to have their own personal constitution,
right.
And a red line of what they're willing to say enough,
Yeah.
And a lot of people can't define that. I think that's one of the issues that plagues our nation currently is, if you ask somebody like, and I'm not saying that necessarily that the government is at that point. I don't think it's fucking far off of where people are saying it's enough. I think some people already have, but
yeah.
But
I know veterans are pissed.
Yeah, but to me, everybody should know where that line is. And I would ask anybody, think to yourself, at what point would you say enough is enough and you'd be willing to fight back? Is there a point? Do you know what that is? Have you thought about it? Because you should, But do you have an EDC? Do you carry daily?
I do. Yeah. So, pull it right here. I love Microtech knives. So that's just kind of my thing.
You don't carry a gun normally?
In my car, so that's a Springfield XD40.
I got you.
I just got comfortable with it. I remember I got back home and it had won gun of the year. And I was like, oh, let's go out and shoot this. And I was like, oh, I love this. Now, if I had a little bit more money, I shot a friend of mine's Kimber 1911 and the gun just shoots itself. Yeah. But it's a little bit large to carry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tracking. What does the first 3 hours of your day look like, and what time do you get up?
Yeah, my routine, which you ask everybody. Yeah. Let's see. So I'm usually up. It depends on the day. I'm either up at 5:30 or right before 6. I'm either heading to a jiu-jitsu or a Muay Thai class in the morning, and then I'll usually go to the gym after that sometimes too. So it depends on the day. But I like to get my first hour of the day to kind of really get my head clear, even after I get home and, get my kids ready for school during the school days and summer. And in the winter, because I live in Colorado, if it's cold outside, I'll start a fire. And then I usually read. You know, and then for me, and I'm sure we'll get into this, like back when I was overseas, I didn't really believe in much or anything. Kind of like took that nihilist attitude. And now I'm a very spiritual person. So I spend time in prayer and reflective contemplation. You know, I'm reading either something nonfiction, reading some C.S. Lewis right now. Love him as an author. And then from there, I'll typically go, you know, like I said, either to the gym after that, or I'm going to the gym before then. And that's really going to encompass the first 3 hours of my day. Now, I'm going to make coffee, cook breakfast, have my, you know, kind of time of solitude before my kids are up and everything's going crazy in the house. And then I'll begin work at that point. And I really try and stay away from technology. I learned this from Ryan Holiday, who's like kind of this stoic author. And we met while I was living in Austin, Texas. And he just talked about how he doesn't like have a cell phone near him during that first, because it just rewires and jacks your brain up. And so really for the first like hour and a half, I really try and stay away from that, or email or notifications or anything of that way. And then I'll jump into email, and then I begin to like kind of triage like what needs to get done for the day and finalize. And then at the end of that 3 hours, I'm really going into kind of that work task mode, to where I'm effectively, you know, creating content, writing, working on web development, graphic design, or connecting with other veterans. And then it just kind of kicks off the rest of the day.
Yeah. Guys, real quick, I've recently launched Patreon for the all-inclusive mic drop experience. This goes above and beyond just ad-free. Yes, you are getting ad-free episodes, but you're getting before and after bonus footage of myself and the guest in studio, in many instances outside of the studio, doing jiu-jitsu, dog stuff, car, motorcycle, recovery, fitness, lifestyle, all kinds of different things. All the different things that I have going on are included in that Patreon page. We're releasing content multiple times a day, every single day. And I want to offer that to you guys. Just go to my Patreon page. The link is in every description, or any platform that I'm on, and come enjoy that experience with me. That content is for you guys. It's what you want to see. It's about you. It's about what world you want to peek into in terms of all the different things that I have my hands in. And we're bringing that to you guys just for you. And I want to take one quick second to just say thank you to everybody who already has signed up. Without your support, we couldn't do what we do for you. So thank you to you guys, and I look forward to seeing you in there. What are the two key components for canine success? That's effective training and proper nutrition. Fueled by Team Dog brings those two components to your family and best friend. The perfect nutritional balance that results in a higher mental acuity, energy, overall vitality, and even an improved appearance. Every product you will find in my company's store was born from the battlefield and not from the boardroom. Let my life's work help you become your dog's hero. I dig it. I have kind of a similar routine, so I can certainly appreciate that. Where are you originally from?
Broken Arrow, Oklahoma.
No shit.
Yeah.
I've been there a few times.
No way.
Yeah, it's not far from here. I mean, up, on the way to Broken Bow and that whole
that's pretty area.
Cabin area. I've been up there, a shit ton of times. It's neat that, as close as it is to here, but as different as it is. I mean, it's very Colorado-like by comparison to around here. I mean, obviously it doesn't have the same caliber of mountains, but just has that kind of wooded, mountainous, feel.
Well, there's Broken Arrow, and then there's Broken Bow. Broken Arrow is a suburb of Tulsa.
Okay, I guess, I got that confused then, but I have been through Broken Arrow. I mean, I've been through Tulsa a bunch of fucking times driving back to Iowa, but so it's just a suburb of Tulsa, so it's not the same kind of thing. I got you. Yeah,
it's a small town. Yeah. I mean, but, growing up in Oklahoma, you actually learn how to pronounce all the names. It's funny when I meet people, they're really like, oh yeah, I went to Miami, Oklahoma. And we're like, it's Miami. And they're like, I went to Tahlequah. We're like, that's Tahlequah. And even graduated from Oklahoma State University there. So
you did? Oh shit.
Yeah.
In terms of growing up there, siblings, what was that like?
So, you know, you and I are both, I mean, I'm on the cusp, but like some what are they, generational specialty, whatever people are like, oh, you're Gen X. Other ones are like, oh, you're millennial or you're Zennial or whatever it is. So I grew up in the 80s and 90s in Oklahoma, and I had a very, this will date me, Leave It to Beaver upbringing, you know, or Family Matters if we're going to get into like the 90s stuff. Parents are great, still married. I had one brother, and we just had a really long history of like military service that was always kind of ingrained inside of our family. Had a lot of just good family. I had a really great upbringing. Yeah. Loved my time there. You know, I got picked on when I was in middle school. I was part of one of those OG skater and goth crowds, so I had hair down shoulders. Yeah. I was kind of a dork too. Like I was into all the nerd stuff. I played saxophone in the band. Yeah. So you're gonna get beat. I thought Kenny G was cool at the time. I didn't know any better.
Alto or tenor or what?
I don't remember, man. Like that was forever ago. And then I switched over to guitar because I got into metal, and I was like, oh man, metal's awesome. Yeah.
So did you have a favorite band that was kind of the inspiration to wanting to pick up a guitar, or were there a lot of them?
Yeah. So, you know, mine were the big four, Metallica, Anthrax, Slayer, Pantera. Well, Pantera wasn't part of that. And like Megadeth. And I remember the first time I heard the Black Album by Metallica, and I was like, I gotta get a guitar. This is awesome. Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's funny shit. I played tenor sax in elementary and junior high, and then switched to guitar in high school, but just kind of funny. That type of upbringing, were there any big ticket items or super inspirational things that happened that were really impactful, good or bad, as a young child?
Yeah, there's two. I'll go good and bad. I'll start with bad and then go to good. Bad was like Oklahoma back then was like the buckle of the Bible Belt, right? And so my parents met at Bible college, and you know I grew up in a Christian household and environment, but he was very much like Footloose, like not the new movie Footloose, but like the Kevin Bacon one. It's like, hey, don't drink, don't dance, like don't have premarital sex, and like you and God are cool and stuff. But like everybody was kind of like doing it behind closed doors, and you know getting into like weed and stuff like that. So it was just, it was a very confusing and conflicted time for me growing up. And there was just a lot of hypocrisy that I saw inside like the church in general and everything else. And especially when I got involved in like kind of the metal scene, I got picked on, a lot in high school and stuff. And then I eventually changed who I was to where I was like, okay, this is not good for me. And that's when I started getting involved in martial arts to learn how to defend myself. But literally overnight, I like cut off my hair, which was down to my shoulders. I started shopping at like Abercrombie and Fitch. And there was this like weird in-between stage where I'm still like wearing Jinko jeans, but I'm wearing like Abercrombie shirts. So I didn't know who I was. And I was trying to figure out my identity at that point. And I turned, and then I literally, because blonde tips were the thing back then. So, you know, my mom, she hated my hair long. So she was like, I was like, hey, if I cut my hair off, can I get bleach blonde tips? And she was like, all right, fine. And I was like, Sugar Ray, you know, Mark McGrath gets all the chicks, so I'm going to look like him. Yeah. So
brilliant.
Yeah. And so that was kind of a bad, like I changed who I was to become acceptable for other people, and kind of went this different route for a while until I found some friends that, you know, I'm still super close with, that were kind of felt like the outcast, but like in between, and they were just great guys. Yeah. And they really kind of set that path. So growing up in that environment was difficult, because I always felt like I could never truly be who I was. I didn't know who I was supposed to be. I was always, you know, latching onto other people's ideals of, oh, this is what I should look like to be acceptable to society. The good is my grandfather was a paratrooper with the 82nd Airborne in World War II. And so we came from just really long military lineage. And so I had a lot of discipline and values instilled in me. And, my family upbringing was great. And so by the time that I was looking to graduate high school, both my parents were college educated. They're like, hey, you're going to go to college. And I was like, great. How are we paying for that? And they're like, you better figure that out. I was like, well, I guess I'll do what the men in my family have always done and join the military and have them pay for it. And it really just set me up for success, like in the long run. So,
did you talk to your grandfather much about his experiences in World War II growing up?
Yeah. So this is a big regret that I have. I write about this in my book, Where Cowards Go to Die. He was a lot like the other men of his generation, where he just didn't talk about it. He would tell the funny stories, like what a lot of us other veterans would do. He missed the D-Day jump because he got pneumonia.
Oh, really?
So, yeah. Wow. And so he got transferred to Patton's Third ID in Germany. And I also tell this story. Come to find out, and this was the story he would always tell to us. He would always tell us the funny ones. He became Patton's Scotch supplier in the war.
Really?
So yeah. So I'll tell you this story. So he gets transferred to Germany. Because after he goes on leave in Paris, and him and this other lieutenant get this bright idea, like, let's hijack a mortuary affairs vehicle. We'll drive it in the city. We'll fill it to the brim with Johnny Walker Red, and then we'll be heroes back at the O Club. Well, they do it. So they go to the O Club. Grandpa's telling me, he's like, yeah, we're getting a little schnockered, And he said the door opens, and he just hears his booming voice go, say, boys, we're going to get some of that fine Johnny Walker Red. And he goes, well, that depends on who you are. And he said, everybody at the table stands up, goes straight to attention. And he turns this way, and he says, like, right at his eye level, there's a nickel-plated revolver. Right there it is, on Patton's hip. He realizes it's Patton. My grandfather's a sharp-witted guy, and he didn't, cave under pressure or anything. And so he told Patton, he said, hey, if you'll give me a couple tennis rackets, I'll trade you a case. And so Patton was like, done. He was like, call my secretary. So they set it up. He realizes that terrible idea. He forgot to ask for tennis balls. So now, because he was wanting to do MWR for his men.
Yeah.
And so he's like, I'm a first lieutenant at this point. He's like, how am I supposed to get tennis ball? How am I supposed to get a hold of Patton? So he said, I call Patton's office. Secretary answers. And I'm like, General Patton, and he's like, I need to talk to, the general. And she's like, well, may I ask who's calling? And so being Johnny on the spot, he goes, tell him it's his Scotch supplier. He said the call goes right through. And he said for another case of a whiskey, he got 2 tennis balls and played that till the felt came off. But getting back to the point at hand, like that was the story that he told. I didn't realize until later, like after he had died, he'd kind of written a little bit of his life story down. He lost some friends in the war, and it really plagued him.
Yeah.
And he wrestled a lot with meaning and purpose and direction after that, but he just never talked about it. And when I got home from Afghanistan, I wanted to talk about my experience. I wanted to talk to him about what he had been through. And we were sitting up in Greeley, Colorado, and drinking vodka gimlets because that's what he drank, And he just looked at me and he said, "Now you're a man." And then just left it at that. And then he died a couple years later. Yeah. So we never talked. Yeah. My wife, however, her grandfather was still alive when we got married, and he fought in the Pacific, and we got to chat.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
So it was good.
So both my grandfathers were in World War II, one in the Army, one in the Navy. And I don't know about you, but I see such a contrast between, and this isn't a knock on Vietnam guys, by the way. I have the utmost respect for those dudes, but it seems like a big contrast between the way that the World War II generation war fighters handled, back then they called it shell shock. It just seems like far less of them were affected. Even if they didn't want to talk about it or wouldn't talk about it, you would have never known that they had been through the shit that they had, whereas it seems like, and maybe it's an age thing, as I was too young to recognize it, but I don't think so, because there's still, quite a few of them around. But it seems like the Vietnam era guys were impacted differently. Now, I don't know if that's how it ended. You know, one generation was valued as the greatest generation and heroes, and were put on a pedestal, and I think that probably helps. Whereas the other, it was basically the exact opposite.
Yeah,
they were
spit on.
They were spit on and condemned for what they did, and you know. But do you see a big difference between the two?
Oh, absolutely. And you know, when I got into my coursework in mental health, like you look at, and Sebastian Junger talks a lot about, you know, tribalism. We're talking about tribes and stuff. You had a bunch of guys that got together for a common purpose with the support of the United States behind them, and they went through war. They did some horrible things. Like, we romanticized the hell out of World War II. Like, it's super funny. I have my grandfather's like leave pamphlet from Paris, and they're like, here's where you go if you have VD.
Yeah.
Like these prophylactic stations. I was like, wait, what? Yeah. And you know, you think about the bombing of Dresden, where they just nuked a city, like Kurt Vonnegut talks about it. And then if you've watched Masters of the Air and kind of that, I mean, it was hard, but there was this kind of combined uniformity. And if you look at rates of like post-traumatic stress disorder in countries where there's like mandatory service, it's very low. And it's because everybody served, and so everybody kind of knew and understood what they were going through. Think about like what was going on back home. There was a war effort. You went to the movies, you were getting the updates. Everybody knew somebody, and when they came home, they were celebrated. Contrast that obviously with Vietnam. So they come back, and they don't have to deal with like as much of the ramifications, because they sat on a boat for like 9 months going back, having this time to decompress. The countries behind them, you know, the things that they're going through. And if you look at the history of like our warriors, we used to have like kind of almost these purification rites. And I think to some degree, World War II veterans had that. Whereas Vietnam, and the way that technology, and then especially when we get into GWAT, it changes dramatically. It's like you're in a combat theater and then you're home. And, you know, for Vietnam vets, it's like super unpopular war. They're getting spit on, and they're having to deal with like a lot of the things that they did that, you know, killing another human being or a Viet Cong or young person or whatever it is. And there's no way to process that. And they're just told, shut up, don't talk about your experience kind of thing. And you look at after World War II, you had the rise of American Legions and VFWs, and to where all these guys got in these halls together and they could talk about what they were going through. And then since then, that's really dramatically dropped off. And I think that's really why you've seen such a sharp rise after Vietnam and into the global war on terror, as opposed to where you had an entire community and nation focused on a war effort to where everybody was involved and felt some responsibility towards it that effectively helped them process that better. Whereas like Vietnam and GWAT, it was like, I just remember coming home from Iraq and being like, okay, I guess I'm home. Yeah. You know, and nobody was there to cheer or greet me or whatever. And then you have 20 years of war, and it's repeat back to back to back stuff. Yeah. And, you know, I just watched the D-Day stuff that went down, and like, in the airport, once again, you know, they're wheeling these 100-year-old dudes through. Everybody's clapping and cheering from them. But man, when I got home, it was just like
nobody really gave.
Nobody cared.
Yeah,
I was just walking. I was just another dude in a uniform.
Yeah, same here. I mean, didn't get spit on, but nobody really gave a shit. And
right.
And similarly, it was like you go from being shot at to sitting on your living room couch in 36 hours. You know, and it's wild. Yeah, it is. It's not normal. All right. So you were inspired to go into the military. A lot of it was due to going to college, or at least part of it. Guys, as you know, I work with a number of different products. One that's easily the most near and dear to my heart from a cause standpoint and a personal relation standpoint is Bubs Naturals. The hat on the coffee table sitting right in front of me belonged to Glenn Doherty. It was a John Deere hat that I gave him. He had it when he tragically passed in Benghazi. And I was fortunate enough to get it back from one of the co-owners of Bubs. He sent it back to me to be able to keep. Bubs Naturals is a tribute to Glenn. He was he's kind of that guy that was everybody's best friend. I met several people that considered him his best friend, and he was a guy that was impossible not to like, and just, caused happy waves that rippled through every community he was ever a part of. His nickname was Bub, and that's where Bub's Naturals comes from. But it's a lifestyle brand. It's inspired by Glenn. They give a ton to charity. They've donated over $200,000 to charitable causes since their inception in 2018. On Veterans Day, 100% of the proceeds go to the Glenn Doherty Memorial Foundation, which does phenomenal work helping active duty and children of lost active duty members go to college or scholarships that they've donated a ton, and they also are heavy into the recreation space of helping people do that, because that's what Bub was all about. They have collagen peptides, which I put into my morning routine every single morning, as well as the functional creamer / MCT oil that goes into it as well. They have hydrate or die electrolyte drink mixes, which are great for pre-workout, during workout, and post-workout to get all the added sodium, potassium, magnesium, etc. that's required when you deplete it. And they now have Bub's Brew, which is a specialty organic coffee that is also very, very good. It's USDA organic, fair trade. It's Whole30 approved, which is the first time that's happened. It's free of yeast, mold, and aflatoxins. Small lot roasted, guaranteed fresh, and it tastes great. Biggest thing is Bub's is a family company. The way that they started is, again, super close to my heart, with him being one of my closest friends for a long time. And I just can't say enough good things about that company, of the product that they put out, why they started, what they give back to veteran communities and the Glenn Doherty Memorial Foundation. And I encourage you to go to bubs.com, and now there's a landing page specifically for Mic Drop listeners. Just enter the code Mike, M-I-K-E, all caps, and you get 20% off your first purchase at bubsnaturals.com. So that's www.bubsnaturals.com/Mike. And you can check out the Mic Drop landing page and go support an amazing cause. As you guys know, sleep is a huge component to recovery and really all aspects in life, and it's something that a lot of us have struggled with, for a lot of our lives, frankly. As you know, I've been a big proponent of Beam, which is a hot cocoa that you drink before you go to sleep, and it's helped tremendously in terms of hours of sleep maintained, as well as the quality of sleep. Today, my listeners get a special discount on Beam's Dream Powder, which is their science-backed hot cocoa for sleep, and it's got no added sugar. Better sleep has never tasted better. As you know, other sleep aids can cause next-day grogginess and just make you feel crappy, but Dream contains a powerful all-natural blend of reishi, magnesium, L-theanine, and apigenin, also melatonin, to help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up feeling refreshed. If you want to try Beam's best-selling Dream Powder, get up to 40% off for a limited time when you go to shopbeam.com/MicDrop, all caps, all one word, and use code MicDrop, all one word, all caps, at checkout. That's shopbeam.com/MicDrop and use code MicDrop for up to 40% off. You went to Oklahoma State. Did you do that prior to, or how did you leverage that?
So I did a portion of my time in the reserves, and that's how I was able to do it. And then, so I was going to do ROTC too, but I was just like, man, I think I'm going to do deployments instead.
Yeah.
So I ended up dropping out of college like 3 times to do specialized training from like the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center in school, SWCC, out at Fort Bragg. And then I went to Defense Language Institute in Monterey Bay, California. And then, it was just war after that, where I was really going through kind of that situation. They were always trying to get me to just drop my packet to become an officer, but I just discovered I loved being with the troops on the ground.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I don't want to do this. And plus, Sergeant Sledge sounded so much cooler than,
Captain Sledge means.
Yeah, but I was like, Sergeant Sledge sounds like a G.I. Joe character.
Yeah, no shit. That's awesome. So, how did that path work then? So you went through boot camp, or you joined the reserves, did boot camp, and then...
Yeah, and then just went into active stuff. So yeah, I joined in 99, you know, that was peacetime Army. Like it was totally different. I know you did too. And, so, you know, Bill Clinton was president. I was like, I'm going to pay for college this way. It's going to be awesome. And, I was like, chicks love a dude in uniform. Because I was this skinny, nerdy kind of kid, and
there's a lot of decisions in your life that are based off of what chicks are going to like.
Oh
I've
my gosh, dude! It's such a dumb thing. It's a you know, it's an 18-year-old man.
Yeah, it's a typical dude thing. I get it. All right, so you joined in '99. Fast forward, where were you at militarily during 9/11?
So I was just about to go to the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center in school. I was supposed to report September 25th. And September 11th happened. I was hanging out with some buddies. I was sleeping off a hangover at the time because it's back when I was just partying and being an idiot. And my mom calls, right? And she's like, and I screen it because it's the old Nokia brick phone, you know. It's 2001, and it goes off again, and I'm like, it must be an emergency. So I pick it up, and I'm like, Mom, what? And she's like, turn on the TV. And I'm like, Mom, it's so early. Like, what? She's like, turn on the TV. One of the World Trade Centers has been hit. And I was like, so I turn it on. And of course, you know, the ticker's going at the bottom. It's like Fox or CNN or MSNBC or one of those. I'm like, plane fluent. I was like, probably pilot error or whatever, you know, and I'm rubbing the sleep out of my eyes. And as I'm watching, the second plane hits. And at that point, I hear my mom gasp on the other end of the line, and I drop the phone. And I'm like, uh-oh. Yeah, and I got on that bird on September 25th, and everything after that changed. Like the whole Army, the whole military structure completely changed. And like I was expecting to get there and, you know, go through some, you know, cool guy training or whatever it was. And it was like, you were doing that, but they were really serious about stuff. They're like, you are not under TRADOC, which is Army Training Doctrine and Command. They're like, you are under SWIC, you're under the Special Operations Command. We do not have to give you sleep. You're going to war. So, and that's just the way that they handled stuff. And so we started prepping. And at the end of my course, I scored really high on their D-Lab, which is like a made-up language. Yeah. At the time, our unit was with Southcom because they hadn't restructured anything. This is 2001. So they go, hey, you, based on your command, you have a choice of Spanish, French, or Portuguese. And I was like, well, I want Arabic, you know. And they're like, sorry, we can't do that. And I was like, well, Spanish is going to help me out the most in the long run. So I go and I learn Spanish. 3 months later, I get orders for Afghanistan after I graduate. So, but I got paid for speaking Spanish in Afghanistan, which was, you know, extra pay. It was weird.
Do you, would you say you're fluent in it now still, or?
No, I wouldn't say I'm fluent. I can understand everything still. And my wife speaks Spanish also. And then one of my close friends, who's my neighbor, he's with 10 Special Forces, and him and his wife are fluent, you know. So we go on dates with them, and then they force us to talk, and it comes back quickly. So I can understand everything. I stumble over conjugation and verbs and figuring out stuff. So I'll ask, like in Spanish, how do you say this?
Get confused with pronouns, do you?
No.
No, it's the one thing I'm pretty fucking clear on. Yeah, that's good shit. All right, so walk us through your first deployment post 9/11. You're going to Afghanistan and the lead up to it, and then boots on the ground.
You know, I think the thing is like a lot of people pretend, and it was the same for me. Like I was pretending I wasn't afraid at first. I was really afraid. Like nobody ever thinks, like, especially if you join peacetime Army, you're going into a war, and it's like, oh, I joined for college money, and I was like, you know, even though I had been through the training and everything else, I was afraid. I was really, really, really scared.
What MOS did you join as?
Civil affairs.
Okay.
Yeah. So literally, the reserve component was under special operations. I'll tell you how this went down. So, let me give you some backstory about my family and how this happened. So we've been in every major conflict since the American Revolutionary War.
Some Lieutenant Dan shit, huh?
Yeah. So really weird thing happened recently. Everybody always asks me, if you've noticed my last name, they're like, Sledge, are you related to Eugene Bondurant Sledge? I was like, I don't know. And then this guy contacts me and he goes, hey, I'm like one of your distant cousins. And I was like, okay, that's weird. And he has a totally different last name. Well, it turns out that his dad or grandfather had been adopted, and he was trying to do some genealogy stuff, found out he was a Sledge, started getting into forensic genealogy, all this other stuff, figured out the entire Sledge lineage stuff. And I was like, hey, man, am I related to E.B. Sledge? He was like, you are. And he took me through the whole process. So it turns out there's the Sledge family only comes from one area in England, and it was Thomas Sledge who immigrated into the United States when they were the colonies. He had some sons, and John Sledge and Daniel Sledge were American Revolutionary War patriots. One of them had 7 of their kids fight in the war also. They were captains. And then the other one had 2 of their kids fight. And then from there, it just branches out. And so E.B. Sledge, who wrote With the Old Breed, which became the basis for the Pacific, he's like a distant cousin of mine. But then on my mom's side, we've traced our lineage back as far as like a general under Napoleon. So it just runs in my bloodline. And so when I was like, okay, I'm going to do the military, and my grandfather was the paratrooper and everything else, I had this ideology of like, I am a warrior, but that's never how I felt. And so by the time that, I was getting to get ready for Afghanistan and deploy over there, like that fear just kind of really paralyzed me. And with the joining the reserve side and getting to pay for college and everything, it was this idea that, oh, this is what the men in my family have done. And so by the time that I get to Afghanistan, I'm looking through, the history and the lens of everything. I'm like, I shouldn't be afraid. And I had this, my platoon sergeant was a guy named Paul Gonzo Gonzalez. And this he's still in the military. He's still serving. He's gangster. He started as like an E1, went all the way to E7. Now he's about to pick up lieutenant colonel. Oh, wow. So, yeah. The dude's stacked. He's done like every course on planet Earth and awards. And, he's a personal hero in my life, but he kind of raised me up from a young pup. And he and some other guys, when I was looking at enlisting, we're talking about, they're like, oh, there's a special operations thing. And I was like, that sounds cool. I didn't know what they did. But really, like, civil affairs people are geopolitical experts. And I scored high enough. They were trying to like throw me at like MI and like all this other stuff. And I was like, no, I want to do this. So I had to call them, and they like got me into the whole thing. But so that's how I ended up like kind of in that area, and then moved into the active duty side, getting deployed and whatnot. And, so when I get to Afghanistan, I'm supposed to we run in what's called Cat A's. They're Civil Affairs Teams Alpha. They work like the Green Berets do. You have your Operational Detachment Alpha or Operational Detachment, that kind of deal. So we work in 4-man teams, and then we integrate with either infantry line units, other special operations units, to minimize civilian interference on the battlefield, or, handle all the rest of the stuff. Most people are like, oh, your hugs and kisses. I'm like, not really. Like, think geopolitics, like how we understand the world, the history, the background, how geography dictates the political landscape, like why they've had this war for like 1,000 years or whatever. And so when I get over there, I realize my job is actually going to be supporting an infantry line unit on the border. And I'm like, what's that star over there that everybody's talking about? And they're like, oh, that's where everybody gets blown up and shot at. And I was like, I do not want to go there. And so I started doing this like really subversive stuff, and I was trying to get transferred to like Cat B or to headquarters. Really? And I was like, oh, I'll stay safe. Yeah. Like, And most people want to be like, oh no, I was gung-ho from the beginning. And while I thought that way, that was not the case for me. And so Paul, Gonzalez, he finds out about this because I'd been subversive and everything else. And I wake up from this nap in the middle of Kandahar. This is 2003. This is early on in the war effort. The Rangers had just jumped in 2002 and taken over this area called Taliban Last Stand. And everything's like GP medium tense there. It's hotter than hell. And he pulls me out of the GP medium and he's like, hey, my nickname at the time was Hollywood because I was a jackass. He's like, hey, Hollywood, walk with me. And I'm like, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. This is my platoon sergeant who's trying to groom me to become a better man, a better soldier. And he's a very gruff guy. He's one of those guys you can make him hump 1,000,000 miles. It can be raining, snowing, no matter what, he'll never complain. He's just that guy. He's the Iceman. And so we sit down on this bench, and he softens, and he goes, hey, I understand you wanted to stay behind. And, I can't even look at him. I'm like picking at the table. And he just sighs, and he goes, Hollywood, I'm afraid to. And he goes, I got a newborn at home. And he said, and there are no guarantees here. And he said, but I need you. He said, we've trained together. We've been through the gauntlet together. And he said, and we're going to get on that chopper tomorrow. And he said, we're all going to go, and we're all going to be afraid, but we're all going to make it home together. And he's like, but I need you. And then I'll never forget what he says. And I tell people this, is he said, courage is doing the right thing even when you're afraid. And so I was like, all right. And it gave me the mental fortitude and the clarity to head out to the border. And I actually found out when I got there, I actually enjoyed combat. It gave me a sense of purpose, meaning direction, even as scary as it was.
How old were you at this point?
21.
21?
Yeah.
And how old was he, do you recall then?
Probably 27. 27. Yeah.
A pretty pivotal moment. And, to me, it's one of those, the potential, well, it is a life-changing moment, but the potential, like if you think about how it could have gone so far the other way if he'd have just been like, sweet, fuck you, stay back then.
Right.
Like your life
I'd have been a turd.
Your life would be so incredibly different now. Mm-hmm. And I think, if anything, at least to me, the takeaway is, a very simple conversation that you can have with people at different points in their life can absolutely fucking change it, in pretty wild ways.
I had to do the same thing with one of my guys when we were deploying to Iraq, and Paul was with me again, and we were both platoon sergeants at that point. So, but he set the stage for me to become a better leader and to show me this is how you take care of Joe. Yeah, so
that's amazing. All right, so you get on that fucking bird, you go to the border, and it's game on right away, or how did that?
Oh, yeah. So I remember. So we go to Organy. I was in two places, Organy and Shkin. They're right on the border. Shkin is directly on the border, and I knew you had Tyler Gray on here, who's a buddy of mine. We connected, and he was like, "Yeah, I was there. I helped set up that forward operating." I was like, "That's wild. I was there," and he's not kidding. It was a shithole. Yeah. And it was just they would just dump rockets and mortars over the border. Same thing. So I arrive in Organy, and it's small. It's a triangle-shaped base, and they are there's just GP medium tents everywhere. They kind of have this early warning system for when we're about to get hit. There's howitzers on base, and I remember I get off the plane, and there's two guys, and there's these flaming barrels. They've cut the oil barrels in half where the toilets are. They've dropped JP8, and they're stirring just the feces and burning it. And one guy leans over and vomits. And I just look at Paul and I go, "Am I going to have to do that?" And he goes, "Maybe." and there's this sign, and it was called Camp Harriman. It was after this guy who had been killed out in that area. and somebody had crossed it out and it just said Rocket City.
Yeah, no shit.
And I was like, what do you mean, man? Like, what is going on here? And so this CA guy, he greets us, you know, he's got a beard. I'm like, oh my God, this is cool. He's in a ball cap. And he's like, yeah, man, like all that flagpole stuff's out the window. He's like, grow out your beard. He's like, they won't respect you here. He's like, wear ball caps. Don't look like the conventional guys. They won't even talk to you. Yeah. And I was like, sweet, this is awesome. So, you know, we get out there, but yeah, like the next day we get hit. And, you know, we've got bunkers. If you've ever seen the documentary Restrepo,
yeah,
it was a lot like that.
Yeah.
Very similar. You know, we're nestled in between mountain ranges, and they were close to the city of Organy, and they would just dump stuff in, and then you head outside the wire, and you're headed through these wadis, which are dry creek beds, and we would do this thing called clear by fire, where, because you would always be coming around a blind corner, and so they would just take a Mark 19 and lob, you know, grenades over it, and then see if we would draw fire.
Yeah.
So that's constantly what we were dealing with and going through. We had a place called Ambush Alley, where it's like, oh, you're guaranteed you're going to get ambushed out there. And then, you know, I'm outside the wire almost every single day.
Yeah.
With these line units, you know, we're interrogating people, we're doing gathering intelligence. You know, we're doing reconstruction efforts. So I always tell everybody I got to see the best and the worst parts of war, you know, the door kicking aspects and then the reconstruction efforts, where I got to see little girls who had never had an education get to go to school, but then the Taliban would blow it up, you know, and then we'd be back to reconstructing it and everything else. So I think the longest I was outside the wire was like 21 days. I didn't shower for 21 days. I was like, came back. I just remember at one point there was like an Apache overhead, and I'm like eating that lembus bread, that's what I like to call it, the soft bread that was in the MRE.
Yeah.
And like, I'm just smearing it with black.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't care. Yeah. Just eating it.
Yeah.
So,
on that particular deployment, as you guys were getting there, did you get a sense of what you guys were there to accomplish? Was that communicated to you?
No.
So it was like, I'm just here to do what the fuck they tell me to do, and you really had no big picture idea as to what was going on.
Well, again, you got to remember, like early on in the war effort, and especially after, like, I think it was the Pentagon Papers came out, and Rumsfeld was like, we don't know what we're doing here. You know, that was like after 6 months. It was kind of the same thing. They were like, we'll do some reconstruction efforts, we'll kill some bad guys, I guess. But nobody cared about us. It was kind of crazy because Iraq had kicked off, and so like the US Eye of Sauron media was like solely focused on that. So we were kind of like in this forgotten era until like 60 Minutes came out, and like Laura Logan and her crew got embedded with us, and within a couple days they got blown up. Yeah. And they're like, man, it's still hot over here. Like, this is crazy. Yeah. You know, they were getting shot at the whole 9 yards, and we were just like, yeah, this is. Like, everybody forgot, but I think that was literally it. It was, the expectation was like, kill bad guys, build some schools, get some projects going, like take them out of like the 15th century and try and like bring them some semblance of like, here's running water and all this other stuff. But you have to remember, Afghanistan is like extremely tribal.
Yeah.
And they're run by like warlords and the mullahs over there and everything else. And, you know, we were up in Waziristan, which was a crazy place to be at. And we went on one combat operation where, you know, they literally dropped the back of a Chinook, and they're like, all right, everybody out. And we're on mountain peaks. There's snow everywhere. It's up to our waist. And they're like, look for, you know, the bad guys, you know, look for the Taliban. And we're like, okay. And like, we were out there for like a day, and we're like, nobody's here. This is dumb. So it was kind of like we were running these operations with like no clear objective, and it was confusing.
Yeah. I mean, there's a pretty recurring theme with so many guests that I've had on, especially with the Afghanistan experience, overwhelmingly that same sentiment of, not real sure what the fuck we're doing here. If they did, it was very microscopic, you know, It was very on the ground, like, you know, this group of people is doing this, we're going to try to stop them, you know, but in terms of their understanding how that piece of the puzzle played a role in the bigger picture, it was basically non-existent, and it's like, how do you expect a military and a nation to win a war that you can't define what even winning it looks like, and they don't even know what that objective is, and it's just disheartening. What would you say the overwhelming percentage was of the types of missions? Were they mostly direct assault type stuff, or what were you guys doing there?
Most of it was not direct assault, because Afghanistan's weird. So like, if you look at Afghanistan, you can tell like when Alexander like marched through there, Alexander the Great, and then it just like progress stopped. It was like 1500s tribal. They're still in mud huts. It's not urban unless you're like in Kabul and Bagram area, but out on the border, it's just, open space, mountains, a lot of goat herding. They're not growing crops or anything out there. They just kind of want to live and let live. And that was their whole thing. Like, if we don't care about the Taliban. As long as like they leave us alone, we don't care about you guys. As long as you leave us alone, kind of aspect. And whereas Iraq, you can tell when Saddam took over, is like it stopped in like the 1970s, where you're just, and it's urban. So a lot of the missions that we went on were just, I'd almost say we were bait.
Yeah, just like recon by bait.
Recon by bait. Yeah. And we would just go out in these areas, and sometimes you get hit, sometimes you didn't.
Yeah.
And, I remember one particular, so they would plan these missions, and like we would always give them, what's funny is like in Iraq, we'd stick with the mission names. We're like, oh, this is Operation Kasserine. Whereas like in Afghanistan, because even early on in that war effort, we didn't know what we were doing. We would just rename them. So we were like, we're on one. I don't even remember the name of it. I remember the name we called it. We called it Operation Lawara Goat Fuck, because that's what it was.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, well, we're going to go drive through these wadis, and then all of a sudden we would get hit, and then we'd have to interrogate like the people, and we're gathering. We have our interpreters with us. We're there during the Ramadan offensive and stuff like that, where we're going out, and they would just kind of plan these missions that just, and I remember we even went to one area, and they're like, yeah, they tried to stand up a forward operating base here, but they met such intense resistance that they were never able to do it. But we're going to camp here tonight.
Yeah.
And I was like,
yeah. Sweet,
fantastic. And of course, they just started lobbing mortars and rockets, 107 millimeter rockets.
So for you being a civil affairs and ultimately PSYOPs guy, I mean, especially on the civil affairs part, you have a much higher level of education and understanding as it relates to the geopolitical framework that exists in that environment. Was it something that you thought about of like, the fuck are we doing here? And did you guys talk about it at all in that same kind of, in a frustration way?
I didn't until I really got to Iraq, because I was younger enlisted at that time. Yeah. And so I didn't really feel like it was my place to say. Now, we would talk about culture, history, background, occasion within one another. I don't think anybody else really cared about that stuff. Yeah. We knew like history of like when the Taliban destroyed the Bamiyan Buddha up in Bamiyan. And then we understood like, okay, here's how history has dictated the political landscape. Like even Alexander the Great and his troops, I remember reading this, they were like, the Afghan tribesmen are like a 3-headed hydra. And if you cut one head off, 3 more will grow in its place. And so we were reading through that stuff. And so we would always talk about it, and we would talk about it with some of the Green Beret guys. But you have to remember, a lot of our people were highly specialized.
Yeah.
Paul, he has 2 master's degrees. My buddy Wegner, who is in Iraq with, same thing. He has like 2 master's degrees in like science, psychology, human behavior, stuff like that. So you're with these highly intelligent, highly specialized men and women who are critical thinkers. And they, early on in the war effort, people didn't want to really speak ill of that. It's 2003, 2004. So we're still mad about 9/11. But by the time the surge happens in like Iraq, a lot of us were kind of like, what the fuck are we doing, man?
Yeah.
So,
with the Alexander the Great thing, I mean, with that being his time frame being, close to the time that Jesus was around, was Afghanistan, I mean, wasn't that technically considered part of Persia back then, or am I mistaken?
I mean, they claimed it as, it just depends. It was still kind of its own autonomous region. His whole thing was that he wanted to get all the way to India.
Yeah.
And it just didn't happen because they were on that campaign for forever. So I can't remember. I've read into it. What's his face did a really good historical fiction book on it. Stephen Pressfield. So,
was there a specific instance or mission that you guys went out on that went the most horribly wrong in terms of being ambushed or whatever that you could walk us through?
Yeah. Yeah. This is one that messed me up for years. So same thing. We're driving through a wadi, and we're with the Afghan militia forces, and they notice stuff because they've been in that area forever, and they go, hey, I think we're getting set up for an ambush. And so we kind of stop the column. They start to move out, and we get hit. And so I'm on the back end of the column, so we immediately scramble out of the cars or out of the Humvees. And like the funny thing is like back during this time period, we were rolling around in soft scan. Like up armor didn't exist back then. So those were just giant targets. You never wanted to be in them, around them, anything. So they were not safe. So the minute you're hit, you're out of those vehicles because they were just, bullet magnets. So I get behind this huge fallen log that's like at the base of this mountain area, and I can see where they're hitting, and we start shooting up in that direction. But we just don't have any clear shots. So they're like, hey, ceasefire. So I'm like just sitting there, and I feel stupid. And I'm like, this sucks. Everybody on that side's like over there getting some, and we're just sitting here. This is dumb. And they're like, hey, they're like, get the mortars up. So the mortar team, they don't have all their people, and they're like, we need help. And I'm like, hell yeah. So Paul's like, hey, get out, come, help me set up the mortars and everything. And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. And so they start showing us. So I like actually get to shoot mortars, and I'm not a mortarman. Yeah. But I'm like, hey, can I do this? And they're like, hell yeah. And so I'm just like, Yeah. And so we start launching these mortars up on this ridge line where everybody's taking fire. And then eventually, luckily we had air support from one of the enlisted tactical air controllers. We had called it an Apache, and that's what ended everything. Yeah. And like, man, if you've never seen an Apache like in combat, that is the most terrifying thing I've ever seen in my entire life. Yeah. Like you can just run or die. That's it. And so that cleans out the ridge line. Firefight's over. I trudge up the hill with our interpreter. We begin interrogating, the men. We're flex cuffing everyone, putting burlap sacks. We call it pucking, person under control. And there's this old man, and he's got this white beard, and it's stained red at the bottom. It's a cultural thing that they do over there. And, he's screaming, he's resisting and everything else. And finally I asked my interpreter, and I'm like, what does he want to know? And he's like, he wants to know about his teenage son. And I'm like, well, where was his son? And he points to the area where we've been dropping mortars. And I'm like, okay. And so I start to head that way, and this other soldier stops me, and he's like, hey, man, I've been up there. Everybody's dead. He was like, it's just nothing but ash and rubble up there. Don't go up there. And I'm like, crap. So I start to walk off, and then I'm like, and I'm mad. I'm mad. Somebody tried to kill us, obviously. And I'm like, nah, fuck this guy. And this will just show you kind of the calloused heart that you kind of get into where, and I really try to practice a lot more empathy and compassion, these days. But I was like, tell him his son's dead. My interpreter. I was like, his son's dead. And so interpreter tells him, and that dude just lets out this earth-shattering, grief-stricken wail. And I stopped, because it hit, And then I just, I walked down, and I didn't really think about it much for years. And then we were getting ready to deploy to Iraq, and, this younger enlisted guy, he's like, hey, man, I heard you guys got to launch mortars in combat. Is that true? And I was like, yeah. And then I remember sitting and dwelling on it for a few days, and I'm like, did I kill that kid? He's a teenager. And that messed me up for several years. So that was probably the most haunting one for me, just because of the circumstances. Yeah. And then obviously the day I got wounded in action was a weird one too.
Was that in Afghanistan?
That was Afghanistan.
Do you mind sharing that one?
Sure. So that was December. I've told this story a billion times. Like, there's everybody wants to know, they're like, and I always joke, they're like, oh my God, you have a Purple Heart? And I'm like, yeah, it's my Enemy Marksmanship Award. So they were, our base would get hit, 107 millimeter rockets. They shot white phosphorus at us. I mean, it was all types of fun stuff. But this particular day, they were really hammering us and like trying to overrun the base. But the militia forces were like, again, Restrepo. You look at that, or even the outpost. If you kind of think not to that level, that was insane. But so I am literally sitting on my cot, and we had started erecting like kind of hard barriers, concrete, and then the top was just like soft shell. And we had this window, and we were running potbelly stoves because it was cold. We were up in the mountains, and we'd built this window, and it had glass in it, and the glass all of a sudden explodes. And I'm like, and then the sirens go off, and I'm like, oh, here we go. So I'm literally in like Ranger panties. Yeah. Ranger panties, this stained brown T-shirt, and I just grab my body armor, throw that on, and grab my rifle and run out the door. And as soon as I get outside the door, there's a Afghan kid. He's probably 10, maybe 12. He's got a sucking chest wound from where shrapnel had hit him, and there's a medic working on him, and he's getting the bore needle ready. And I like stop, and I'm just staring at this kid, and he's like doing the wheezy thing, and like I'm like, I gotta go, and so I run, and I let the medic handle that stuff, and there's just incoming coming in, and back in the early days of the war effort, there wasn't Kellogg, Brown and Root or Halliburton or any of that stuff, so we would employ local nationals, like local Afghans, and Afghan culture is very, especially that's Southeast Asia, but it also happens in Iraq. They'll like sell out their family for like $1. I'm sure you know this. Oh, yeah. Like we would go into towns with like backpacks full of cash, like with the special activities guys, and they're like, who wants to talk? And they're like, my uncle, he's a piece of shit. Suddenly everybody wants to turn in everybody. But they had talked that day, whoever it was on base, and we found out after the fact, like a bunch of the dudes wanted to leave early, so they left early, and then the ones who stayed on base, like, it didn't really have anything to do with it. But so they started targeting all of our bunkers in strategic positions, and they were packing the 107 millimeter rockets with C4, but they had a spotter, so they were just walking them in. So I was like, so I went to the TOC, our Tactical Operations Center, and Gonzo was in there, and he was like, hey man, you got to get the rest of the civilians out of here, like get them into a safe spot. Like he's like, rally with the intel guys, which was my buddy Steve. That's his name. We're just gonna, it's Steve. He's with the Joint Special Operations Command now. He's in all the whole wiki world. So still serving. He's about to get out, but he's like, rally with Steve, and then get these people to safety and try and find someplace. So we end up we're gonna head to a bunker. But all of a sudden, we see all the 10th Mountain guys just run out of the bunker because, like, one just lands right on me, and they're like screaming. They're like, "Go target the bunker!" And everybody's like, it's just pandemonium. So I'm like, oh crap, we got to find someplace reinforced. And so I see Steve, and he was like, "Hey, we should use the Chow Hall as a secondary rally point. It has reinforced walls. We can get between some stuff." So we gather the locals. get them in through this door to where the kitchen and chow hall is. And we get them in there, and we meet up with this other guy, this other intel soldier who's in there at the time. And he walks out with a Dr. Pepper, and we're all kind of laughing and chuckling. We've been through this rigmarole before, and when you've been through enough of it, you kind of think yourself immune and that you're not going to die. And so we get to kind of this safety point, and Steve's like, oh man, where'd you get a Dr. Pepper? I haven't had one of those in months. And he's like, oh dude, they just got a pallet in. And so he runs in and grabs a Dr. Pepper, and he's like, oh, I guess we should hunker down. And then that's it. The world goes freaking black for me. And I wake up, and it's like that scene out of Black Hawk Down, which is, that's the weird part about movies, is they're somewhat accurate, like some war movies are accurate, and then somewhat fake, because they don't show the boredom and everything else, and moments of non-combat that is probably 70 to 50% of your time. And my ear, everything sounds like I'm underwater. It's like, wah, that high-pitched noise. And I get up, and there's this image that is forever seared in my brain. There's this huge barrel-chested Afghan man that we had put all them into the corridor, and we were just dumb getting our drinks, didn't get to that reinforced area, and had a 107 millimeter rocket just explode right next to our position. So it launched me forward. The concussion from the blast launched me forward into a wall, and it shattered this wrist. I had a traumatic brain injury. They didn't know it was that at the time. They were like, oh, you have a concussion. And then it shot shrapnel into my back plate, lower back, and then on my forearms and stuff. But that was superficial because it blew out the glass where it was too. And so I was really confused. And I wake up, and I'm just like, and he's scared. He is terrified at this point. And he's trying to help me. And I'm waving him off and stuff. And I notice these black and translucent flecks on my forearms. And I'm like, what is this stuff? And I start rubbing. My hands start bleeding. My forearms start bleeding. And I'm like, what is going on? And I realize it's shrapnel and glass. And I'm just rubbing it into my arms. I'm like, all right, we're going to stop that. And then I'm like, Steve, where are you, man? And I look, and there's a door into the area where we would eat, and it's been blown off the hinges. There's Dr. Pepper everywhere, and he's gone. And my first thought, because I can't really think clearly, is, my God, he's been vaporized. Steve's been vaporized. So I run into that room, and it looks like a scene from The Walking Dead where, the undead have dragged their body across the floor, and he's over in the corner, and he's rocking back and forth holding his elbow. And I run over, and I'm like, are you hit? And he keeps muttering something over. And then finally he's like, I think I broke my fucking elbow, man. And I'm like, that's the least of your concern. There's blood everywhere, And so I pull out my dagger. I slice open his BDUs, his desert camis. And I look, and it looks like a pop can has exploded in his tricep where he'd been hit. And it's just blood just pouring out of that thing. And I'm like, oh no. And so the other intel guy, he runs in, and I don't even know that I'm injured. It's just because I have an extreme adrenaline dump going on at this point. And I'm like, we got to get him to safety. We got to get the medics. So we get him into the corridor with the rest of the Afghans, and this is the whacked out part. Before we changed tactics over to Iraq and trauma and surgical care, we still had the little, Vietnam era stuff. And the training SOP at the time was, that is yours. You do not put that on somebody else. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Okay. So his is gone. We're like, oh, I don't know where it is. And I'm like, well, you can't have mine. And the other guy's like, well, he can't have mine. And I'm like, what do we do? And so we find these clean dish towels because we're in the kitchen, and we start tying off and doing a pressure dressing and everything on him. And, looking back, it is so ridiculous. Yeah. But that's how muscle memory works when you're in that situation. And I was like, we got to get the medics. So I run out the back door. And they had and the triage was at this open air gym. Well, they had just closed it off and concreted the whole thing. So I'm banging on this thing and I'm like, we got injured, we got wounded, I'm screaming at this point, and nobody can hear me. And I'm like, oh my God, we're going to die. This is it. And that's like when the fear like really hit me and my hands start to tremble. And I run back in, another rocket comes slamming in, knocks me to the ground. I burst through the door and I look and Steve at this point is ghost white. Just, he's lost so much blood. And I'm like, they blocked access to triage. Where the hell do we go? And the other guy, I'm like, I just look at him and I was like, it's your turn to get blown up. and because I'm not running out. I'm not running out again. I was like, I've done my part. I'm going to take care of Steve. And it's kind of this moment of cowardice, really, because I just that fear finally took me, even though I had been in situations. And I was like, he's going to die. I don't want to run out the front door where we just got blown up. I'll get blown up again. I might die on the way. And so the other guy, he was actually the real hero. And I tell everybody this, he runs out the front door, gets the medics. Well, the medics are so frazzled by the time they get there. We're trying to start IVs. Their hands are just shaking, trembling, because it's just pandemonium. And we finally get an IV line. That's when I start going in and out of lucidity. And so the rest of this, I will recount from what has been told to me. So eventually, my buddy, who's the ETAC, calls in a B-1B Lancer. They take out the side of that mountain. The attacks stop. They have the QRF out there, the Quick Reaction Force. We get them on a litter. It's me and the other intel guy and the two medics calling a medevac. End up there. They get him out immediately because he's urgent critical. And they fly him to Salerno Air Base, which is like the Italians had control over, to, forward surgical trauma team. And then Paul finds me, my team sergeant, Paul Gonzalez. And they've given me Steve's rifle. And he says that, I'm just clutching it to my chest like this and just staring at the helicopter off in the distance. And he's like, hey, man, let me take a look at you. And so he's in EMT back home, paramedic, was what he had done. And so he's got lots of training. And he was a combat medic before he went over to the civil affairs side. So he knew exactly what he was doing. So he starts testing stuff, and he's like, said I was having like word salad, and then like my responses were really slow and slurred and stuff like that. And he's like, you're just covered in blood, man. And he's like, I don't know if it's Steve's, I don't know if it's yours, like, it's the whole ordeal. And he's like, you're hurt. And I was like, I'm fine, I'm good. I just have my bell rung. Just have my bell rung. I'm good to go. Let's go get these guys, kind of thing. And he's like, nah, dude, we got to get you out of here. And so they call in another bird, and they said, is he urgent critical? And they're like, no. And so my hand starts to swell, and it starts to hurt really bad. And they're like, all right, well, we got to splint this because we only have like one medic really out there. And I get stuck on base for 3 days because they were going to evac me to Kandahar because it was an urgent critical because of sandstorms. And so I just had to sit on base, and the logic at the time was like, oh, if he has a concussion, keep him up for 24 hours. So I've had this adrenaline dump, and it's crazy, and then they keep me up for 24 hours. So I'm just like saying crazy shit at that point, like, I'm like, where are all the violins coming from? What's going on, man? Yeah. And they're like, what is wrong with this dude?
Yeah. Did they give you anything for did they have anything for pain, or were you just shit out of luck?
I was shit out of luck. Until I got to Kandahar, that's when they gave me like Percocet and stuff. But yeah, like, and here's the worst part too. When I got to Kandahar, they had cleaned up everything else. I looked good. They're like, we think he had a concussion. He seems better now. So they're like, well, let's go in and this is just PA. Like, I think it was used to just having Joes on Kandahar just be stupid. So they go in and they like X-ray my arm, and he was like, hey man, I think you just got a sprain. And I was like, dude, this thing is swollen. And he's like, yeah, it's probably just a sprain, and I was like,
even after they x-rayed it?
Okay, so here's the thing. He didn't review the x-ray. So I go back. All of a sudden I get woken up in the middle of the night and they're like, you have to go see the orthopedic surgeon because he reviews all the x-rays. They're like, your hand's fucked. And they're like, so I'm like, I get casted from here to here and I have like my thumb out. And so it looks like I'm always doing this to everybody. Like I'm doing the Fonzie, hey, because my hands are curled this way. Awesome. I'm like, God, I look like a jackass. And they're like, hey man, you can go home. Like you're dead weight. And I was like, no. I was like, I'll stay on Kandahar and answer some radios. And I was driving interpreters around and stuff like that. And then that's how I finished out my last month.
Yeah.
But Steve came back and this guy, whoever this PA was needs to be fired. But they couldn't get all the shrapnel out because they were like, we're worried about nicking stuff. And so they got, they closed it up and sutured it and everything. So he comes back and we're sitting in there and the deal together. I'm about to get my hand cast and he's like, yeah, I got to get, shrapnel out of my body and stuff. And he's like, no, they wouldn't have left shrapnel in there. Same PA. And I was like, yeah, just the same way that my hand wasn't broken. He's a captain. Yeah. And he was like, you better check yourself. And like, eventually Steve loses it and just like tells the dude he's going to kill him. Yeah. So like, and they were like, they have to call in like the MPs and stuff to like, it's bad. Like, but they were like, all right, these guys are frazzled from being on the border. It's fine, whatever. But yeah, he had told Steve like, yeah, you don't have shrapnel in your
Jesus, man. Fucking Army's best.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
Man, that's wild. That's intense. So you go home after that, and then did you go through your civil affairs and PSYOPs schooling after that?
No, I'd already been through it.
You'd already been through it.
Yeah, I've been through that and Defense Language Institute. Okay. And then, I was like, man, I'm never going to deploy again. Never, 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 never. And I'm home for like about a year.
Like you didn't want to, or you?
I didn't want to.
Oh, okay.
I didn't want to because I was like, that was crazy. I almost died.
Yeah.
And then I started missing more, which is...
What was the first indicator that was the case?
I hated being home.
But I mean, was there a thought that you had that was like that defining moment of like, fuck, I miss it? Like, do you remember that?
Yeah. I had gone out to eat with some of my fraternity brothers, from my college days and stuff. And I remember thinking like, oh, they think I'm a monster. Because they were like, oh, tell us some more stories, And I was like, all right, sweet. And this is a story. I actually wrote this essay for a competition, and it ended up winning like honorable mention and stuff. But I told about that moment. So we go to this Chinese buffet, and there's a scene. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Hurt Locker. It's ridiculous as far as like.
I haven't actually.
Okay. The overall, like,
I'm familiar with it.
Jeremy Renner's like a hotshot EOD guy. None of that stuff would have ever really happened. But the director nailed this one part where like he gets home and he's in the grocery store and he's looking at like a million different cereals and he's just staring dead-eyed at it. And he's like, and it's just overwhelming, the choices. And, eventually it has this voiceover and he's like holding his son and he's like, there's only one thing I love and it's war, And Ernest Hemingway, that's another favorite quote that I have. I don't like it, but I think it's very true. And it goes, certainly there is nothing like the hunting of armed men, and those who have hunted men long enough and like it desire nothing else afterwards.
Yeah.
And I know Tom Spooner's who's talked about that, like in the Sean Ryan show, where he was like, I realized like that was the breaking point for me, where I was like, something's wrong with me. And so I go to this Chinese buffet and I'm paralyzed by like all these options. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, what do I do? Like, man, this is probably a year after I've been home, even though I've somewhat adjusted. And they're like, hey man, tell us some more stories. And the first one that comes to mind is this game we played. And and it's terrible. But the thing that you have to remember, and I want your audience to remember, and you're going to hate it too, just because you love dogs, and I love dogs too, is in Afghan culture, dogs are like subhuman. You know, like they just treat them poorly, and there's just feral dogs everywhere, and so we ended up having like a lot of them get on base to where the colonel was like, "Hey, get the sniper team up, put them all down." Kind of thing. And then every time we would leave base, they would like come out and like try and attack us or you know, they would chase after our cars. So everybody kind of gets to this nihilistic point to where we just start running over dogs with the Humvee. We're just like, bop, you know? And so we start this thing called Dog Strike. We have those charcoal markers. We're just putting like how many dogs we've killed with our Humvees. And again, this is war. Like, I'm not trying to sugarcoat it. I'm not trying to justify what I did. You get to this almost like kind of uncaring level if you don't check yourself and you don't know how to do that. And luckily, by the time that I was in Iraq, I'd gone through enough self-reflection and did some counseling after I got back to recognize when I was like slipping into the abyss. But I was like, I start telling them this story and they are all just horrified. And I was like, and I'm like, never mind. And I'm like, I'm not going to talk about war. I'm not going to talk about anything anymore because like what we do over there is like the dark underbelly of human nature, and people just don't understand. And I realize they don't understand me, you know? And so after that moment, I'm just like, I don't fit here. I don't belong here. The people in my unit know me. And when I was overseas, nobody judged me. So, you know, I miss that simplicity of a mission. I miss literally being able to have the camaraderie and the brotherhood that's there, knowing that somebody has my six at all times and that they inherently understand like what I'm going through and what they're going through. And they love me enough so that they're willing to give their life for me. And so that started wearing on me. And then one day, Gonza comes up to me and he's like, "Hey, man, putting together a special team." He's like, "We're going to a really, really shitty place." And I'm like, I don't know, man. I don't know. And, you know, I'm newly married at this point. His wife is pregnant. And he just kind of pins me up against the wall. And he's like, "Look, you're one of our most seasoned NCOs now." He's like, "We got a bunch of young guys and dudes that have never deployed." And he's like, You wait on this opportunity. He's like, you're just going to get called for, they're just going to tell you. And he's like, you're going to get stacked with a bunch of turds and killed. He's like, the rest of the team that we were in Afghanistan with is pretty much already signed on. And I was like, all right, let's do it. So I go home, tell my wife, I'm like, "Hey, I'm getting deployed." Don't tell her. I did not tell her I volunteered for this one. Being like, yeah, I didn't, because I was still on dwell time, you know? And so we start prepping again and find out we're going to Ramadi during the surge, and the stories coming out of there are just freaking nuts. They're like, and so this is the thing a lot of people don't recognize. And I know you've had Major Scott Husing on here. He's a buddy of mine. He wrote Echo and Ramadi. And we're both in each other's books because we did clearing operations together. But one of the things that I tell people that's a key component of understanding just how violent Ramadi was like during the surge is from 2006 to 2007, it accounts for half of all daily attacks that happened in the country of Iraq. From 2006 to 2007, it accounted for half of all deaths that occurred in the United States Marine Corps that year. So, like, imagine that half of the attacks that you're getting, like if you're in Baghdad and you're a general looking at this, are coming out of one city. And so, like, the ROE was insane. It was like, you see somebody with a shovel, shoot them. Do they have a cell phone? Shoot them. Do they peek around a corner twice? Shoot them. Like, it was just shoot. Like, it was a turkey shoot. So, like, when we get there, you know, and at this point I'm running my own team, and I have, a lieutenant. So they were so short staffed on CA people that they were just pumping dudes through the officer course, and they were like, if you're first lieutenant promotable, you can become a CA officer, because it works kind of like the same way that the Green Berets work, where you need to be like, for the leadership there, you need to be a captain. But they were like so short staffed. They're like, we don't care. We need people. Just put them on. So I get this newbie lieutenant, never deployed. And, it's me. And then I've got this other guy, Staff Sergeant Wagner. And he'd been blown up in Missoula, so he knew what he was getting into. And I have my corporal, Jacob Starnes. And, he's never deployed. He's 19. And I'm like, oh my God. And so like, I have to tell his parents, I'm going to bring you home, kind of thing. But, we get there and we discover that we're going to be taking over this area called Tamim. And there's this notorious area called the White Apartments. And at the time we were taking over homes and turning them into combat outposts. So like, we would go in, we'd kick the families out, we'd give them a buttload of money. They'd still shoot at you because, I mean, think about it. You took over their house.
How much is a buttload of money?
Oh, like, gosh, like 50 grand?
No shit.
Yeah.
American?
Oh, yeah. Dude, I had stacks of cash. Like, we were paying contract. So this is why I was like, the stimulus checks in America. Let me explain this. So again, civil affairs guy who understands geopolitics. I also understand a little bit of economics. You kind of have to. We super inflated their economy. We made the rich richer and the poor poorer. So like, if you just start printing money and then just...
You mean like here in the United States right now?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like what we did with stimulus checks. It was done. I was like, yes, I'm going to take that money, but no, this is a stupid idea. It doesn't make sense, because if you just literally print money, you're going to hyperinflate the economy, and all of it goes into the economy. People are just going to buy stuff. Well, we had these contracts. We were paying them, as opposed to paying them, Iraq numbers. Like, they're like, oh, and I got in so many fights. I got tossed out of a command staff from the 3rd ID because I literally told the commander of the battle space, hey, I'm not gonna do this just so I can become a bullet point on your OER, your officer evaluation report. Oh man, that did not go over well. But so we hyperinflated the economy. We were paying, guys, $30,000 to like level out an area so that it could become a soccer field for like MWR. And I was like, I'm not doing that. And then they would just go around me and find somebody to do it. 30 grand. It took them like a day of work where they would just like literally get their buddy's bulldozer, and then they wouldn't use it. It would be trash. I mean, the city was, because they were like, oh, if we build soccer fields, people will come out. I'm like, this is an urban warfare. Like, we're taking sniper pop shots everywhere. Like, you can't go out anywhere. And so like literally our first day when we went to the combat outpost, like they were like, we were with the Marine guys, Marine Civil Affairs. And they're like, hey, yo, all right, when we pull up to this place, you're going to have to jump out and run. There's just snipers everywhere. And they're like, zigzag. And then like get it. And they're like, that's the door right there. So as soon as we pop out of that door,
yeah.
I was like, this is nuts, man. So it was the epicenter of hell. We called it the meat grinder, because it was just chew you up and spit you out.
So I guess going back to you're taking the houses over, you're paying them a shit ton of money, which that's by far the biggest figure I've ever heard. I mean, I've had, I don't know how many guys on here over the years that were Afghanistan vets. I've never heard a figure anywhere near close to that. But
I've still got my report. I was paying some dudes $200,000 at one point. I just had stacks of hundreds I roll around in a backpack with. Man.
Yeah. Is anybody holding you accountable, inventory or audit wise?
Yes and no.
I mean, like, you could have stolen if you wanted?
Dude, yes, totally. Like, that's the thing. Now I have ethics, and my team did too. And I kept I still have all my paperwork, because I was like, one day they're going to come back and probably try and screw me, because that's the government.
Yeah.
And the weird part is like, when I got home, I finally thought about it. I was like, I guarantee there are some dudes who made out with hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars.
Yeah.
So.
Well,
easily.
yeah, I mean, yeah, not to mention the other side of the coin of, gold is a big liquidity component to the Iraqi culture. There's a lot of people store gold, or at least some. and all of the different, raids that a lot of guys have been on where they're going into government offices or Saddam's extended family or whatever, running into like safes full of all kinds of shit. I can't even imagine, but...
this is how I realized it was happening. I didn't think about it at the time, but I paid a contractor. So we actually did our jobs. Like, we pacified that city. By the time that we got to the middle of like summer of 2007, like it had become like the gold standard of like what we should do. And there's been numerous books written on it, but I really credit our team with doing a lot of the reconstruction effort. Like, imagine you go into a city and you take away, like, imagine the Chinese government invades America. Of course, we're not going to put up with that anyways, but they take out your water, sewage, trash, and electricity. And you live here in Texas and it's that hot?
Yeah.
Well, it's 120 friggin' degrees in the middle of Ramadi, and they don't have AC. Yeah, you're going to be pissed off and shoot at everybody. Once we returned 18 hours of consistent power back, like the shooting stopped. They were like, oh, creature comforts, yay. Yeah. And then sewage, same thing, all of that. But I just remember I was paying a contractor for some water pump or whatever, and like he was like handing me a stack of cash, like 20 grand. I was like, what is this? And he was like, oh, that's your cut. And I was like, oh, no. And I like had to tell my interpreter, that's not how we operate. This guy had operated with American people who were paying him before. So something went on while we were over there. I don't know who they were, but.
What's the process for, I guess 2 questions. How many of you guys that are handing out tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars for stuff like that, how many of you are there in that area?
Let's see. So when it was my team, let's see. We had down at Camp Corregidor, that team. We had one at Hurricane Point, Shark Base, Camp Ramadi. There's probably 10 to 20 of us.
Okay.
The CA, and then the Marine component, CA component. And then they let some of the infantry guys do it. And I think that went really poorly.
All right, so couple handfuls of guys, couple dozen.
Let's say 20 dudes in the entire city.
Yeah. The actual liquid money, the cash that you're using, it's American?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Where, like, are they flying pallets of cash in and keeping it? Like, where the fuck is that being kept?
So it was kept in, like, this finance office.
And who's guarding that?
The finance officer. That's it.
So,
I mean,
it's very plausible that several points along that chain, people could have been siphoning money, and there'd be no way of knowing other than them, basically, right?
Here's the other thing. I go, where's all that money coming from? That's the American U.S. Why are we paying them? What is going on here?
Yeah,
it's the American taxpayer dollars.
Yeah, that's
and
wild,
then we just hyperinflated their economy, and we're overpaying them.
Yeah.
I mean, fraud, waste. We had this master sergeant. His name's Old Dog. He's a Cherokee Indian. Lives out here in Oklahoma still. He's freaking awesome. He finally got fed up and sent up a fraud, waste, and abuse report. Woo, man, the hand of God came down with that one. They got mad at us. But yeah, that's what they were doing. It was a lot of fraud, a lot of waste, a lot of abuse.
Yeah. Before the break, we were talking about kind of the door-to-door type stuff. You did a lot of the reconstruction stuff, piles of cash, et cetera. Now, if you could kind of walk through that deployment as it relates to the actual combat operations where you're going door to door and you're getting into the real thick of Ramadi in 2006 in Iraq.
Yeah. So one of the things that civil affairs soldiers do is civil affairs and psychological operations were created out of the special forces community because they realized that they needed to minimize civilian interference on the battlefield, which is the civil affairs aspect, and do their reconstruction efforts. And if you look at the way that Green Berets operate, it's the same thing. They're doing a lot of guerrilla warfare. So how do you change hearts and minds and everything else? Well, you have that. Most people think we only do reconstruction. Not true. It's more the geopolitical aspect, and then specialized and subject matter experts. And really, if you look at like what civil affairs is doing now, they are highly specialized. I just trained a buddy of mine to go through selection. It's so weird. People are like, how were you a CA guy? And I was like, man, they just needed bodies. Like, if you could make it through SWIC, they're like, here you go. Like, you know, and if you wanted to transfer from reserve over to the active duty side, they're like, all right, sweet. And then we went through this thing like called the Great Divorce, where like the reserve component is no longer associated with the active duty component. And so, because the active duty component is special operations and reserve is under like traditional Army and stuff now, same for PSYOP, and they've realized that was a big mistake. But I trained him to go through it, and they're really focusing in on them being like almost like diplomatic subject matter experts that go in and do almost like kind of covert stuff now. It's very fascinating, and PSYOP has changed also, but we were created out of that. And so there's this aspect to it to where if you're going into the battlefield environment, then you're trying to actively minimize civilian interference on the battlefield, because if you're going house to house, that's going to happen. Yeah. And so what do you do if you're just an infantry line unit soldier and you don't speak the language, you don't know how to handle these people, you don't know their history, their background, or occasion, you're just there to blow stuff up. Well, you need somebody to kind of become the buffer to that. And so you're always going out we were out every day. And that was probably the worst part. I know when Major Scott Husing was on your podcast, he was like, yeah, we just went out at night. We didn't have that luxury. We had to go out during the day when Route Michigan was just black. Just everything was loaded with IEDs. So I would literally wake up every single day, and I was either going to do like check on reconstruction efforts, or I was going out with an infantry line unit, or I was going out with SEAL Team 3, or whoever it was that we needed to go out with, where they needed us in that environment. And so depending on what you were doing, you were either kicking indoors or it was kind of chill or whatever it was. And then same thing, when they would run major clearing operations, they're like, all right, we got to get a CA team with us. And so it was like, all right, we're going out. And so Scott and I, Major Scott Husing, like December 26th of 2006, we planned this giant operation where we were just literally like, okay, the insurgents control too much. We got to go clear this area out. And they're like, we need the CA guys. And so we're the guys with the interpreters, you know, we have the relationships. We know, you know, okay, this guy's dirty. This area, you don't want to go over here. You know, we've created and formed those relationships and everything. We got the cash. So like if they're out on a clearing op and they're like, we need to kick these people out of their house and take over, they're like, all right, CA, you guys got to handle that. And so we would go in there and do our diplomatic stuff at the same time, try and get it to where we weren't getting shot at immediately as soon as we kicked them out, to where they go down the street and tell the insurgency, you know, like, hey, F these people. So we're trying to make it somewhat lucrative, somewhat responsible and everything. And the way that Ramadi is set up, you know, you have all these housings, you know, and like I said, it stopped in like the 1970s. And you don't know what you're walking into. You know, is this a house that is going to have insurgents or people that are sympathetic? Or are they going to be more welcoming to, you know, American soldiers? Are they hiding stuff? And I remember I was out with one of Scott's team. I love Marines. Marines, you know, we have that special relationship. I think the Army and the Marines do. But like, Marines are crayon eaters, man. They do dumb stuff, and like, we're subject matter experts and whatnot. You know, most of them just want to kill and destroy things. One of the funniest moments in my life, we're out under night, because it's Scott's team. He likes to go out under night, man. We leave literally at midnight, right on Christmas Day. You know, like it's technically December 26th. We're walking out, and we got, you know, night vision superiority, and we're with all these guys. We got packs on. We're gonna be out until the city's taken over. We take over this house. We go in and we clear this house. And they just do dumb stuff sometimes, man. So my team splits up. And so two of my guys go with one of the Marine Expeditionary Force, and me and my lieutenant go with the other. And both of us have really funny instances where they were like, oh man, we can't get through this gate. We need to blow it. And my the other sergeant who was on my team, Wagner, he's like, hey man, that's a really bad idea. There's like a lot of goats right here. We're going to set people off. They're like, nope, we're going to do it. Just pack on the C4 and then just blow the thing. There's just dead goats everywhere. We're like, oh God, now we got to pay this stuff, you know? But for me, the funny moment we went in this house and it was, I don't know. I've been looking for this answer for years. We go into this house, it's empty. And we're clearing, we're doing CQB, the close quarters combat, making sure everything. So we get rooftop overwatch. And so we're checking through this house and we keep finding these trash bags. And it's like a ghillie suit, but it's like black hair. And we find them all over the house. And I don't know what it is. Like if anybody ever knows or you happen to know, like let us know. We never figured it out. And it's been one of those weird things for years. I'm like, were they like dressing in this stuff or whatever it was? But anyways, so we find these trash bags and I'm going up and my lieutenant goes to the rooftop. I come down, there's this Marine. He's tapping on this thing on the wall. And he's like, hey, Sergeant, there's some type of like egg timer thing here on the wall. And I was like, don't touch that, Sure enough, the house was rigged to blow. And behind this wall, they had just propane tanks everywhere. So we got everybody out of there. But he's just like, tap, 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 tap.
Yeah. Jesus.
So, yeah, it was stuff like that. They would literally rig houses to blow. There's like daisy-chained IEDs everywhere in the road. So a lot of time, and I have a tattoo of a Bradley here because that was, I worked a lot with 1st Infantry Division, Task Force 177. And so they had the Bradley fighting vehicles and we were just up and down the streets, and when you would take casualties, that's where a lot of times the Bradleys would roll with the chain guns. They're dropping the ramp. You're throwing guys in there and kind of the whole 9 yards. And I mean, it was just, bad things would happen. Like, there was a guy, he was the Civil Affairs S5 for Colonel Sean McFarland, 1st Armored Division, had control over the battle space when we first got to Ramadi. And he's a general now, General McFarland, and he did a phenomenal job. First Armored Division really changed the battle space in that area. And the S5 was a guy named Captain Travis Patriquin. He was former Special Forces. He's kind of become like a legend as far as like his ideology is what turned the tide really during the surge of like, how do we impact the area? And so we started working with sheikhs who were really just tribal warlords, flipping them because it became the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so we worked with this guy named Sheikh Sitar and he eventually got killed. But he was originally killing Americans and then we flipped him.
How did you do it? Just through money or through ideology or what?
So what had happened, Patrick Green was shrewd enough to kind of recognize, so he spoke Arabic, just really genius guy. He really understood the SF and Special Operations mission, where it was more of like kind of the diplomatic aspect as opposed to just going in and being like, let's kill these dudes, and then see where the chips may fall. Sitar had been arrested. We had like imprisoned him a bunch at Camp Ramadi in the past. And that just makes him angry. Well, he pissed off like a member of like Al-Qaeda or whatever. And so they killed the sheikh's family member and wouldn't return the body, which is like very egregious in, the Muslim culture. So Sitar was smart enough to start interacting Patrick was smart enough to start interacting with Sheikh Sitar, who kind of oversaw everything and was like, and spoke Arabic and the whole 9 yards. So he was able to get and understood the Quran and the whole 9 yards. So he began to slowly kind of work, a PSYOP mission on this dude and was like, hey man, if we get your guys and set them up as Iraqi police and we get your contractors in and feed them projects, we can rebuild the city and you'll be a hero. And he was like, and so if we do that, and he made this really hilarious PowerPoint out of like stick people to pitch, but it freaking worked. The thing is he never lived to see it. And to this day, I don't know why they took this risk. Ollie North and a team from like Newsweek or whatever showed up and they were like, well, we want to see like, where the fighting and everything. And we were working on flipping the area. They drove down around Michigan, middle of the day, like terrible idea. And I'm like, Patrick was smart enough to know that is not ideal. They hit a daisy-chained, catastrophic, like just blew apart. I mean, there was nothing left when we got there, like nothing.
So, taking one step back, the sheik that ended up not living to see him being regarded as a hero. What was the ask on your guys' part? Obviously, that the reward for him is we're going to do all this, but what were you asking of him in terms of flipping on them? What does that look like?
So we said, hey, basically all your homies, we're going to set them up as Iraqi police officers, and all your homies, we're going to feed them these reconstruction efforts. And then, of course, they all kicked back stuff to Sitar, who became like kind of a better, bigger warlord and stuff. And then at that point, everybody's paying him homage, and he basically played up to his sense of ego, I think.
But I mean, what are you getting in return by giving that to them? What are they giving you guys?
Oh, we're pacifying the city.
So most of the resistance was coming from those guys? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Originally, yeah.
Okay. I thought when you said flipped, I thought you meant more like it got him to turn on other guys, but you're basically saying, hey, all you guys that are fighting, stop fighting. We're going to do this and work together. And
yeah, so you had two elements in the area. So after Operation Phantom Fury, which was Fallujah, you kind of had this in tandem thing going, where it was Fallujah and Ramadi from 04, 05. And that's when General Jim Mattis went in there and just kicked ass, and they just like basically destroyed Fallujah. And all the insurgency went over to Ramadi because it wasn't far. And then Al-Qaeda and ISIS and everybody else, ISIL,
Zarqawi and...
Yeah, Zarqawi and all those dudes flooded into that area. So they were kind of working in tandem with one another.
I gotcha.
So originally, Sheikh Sitar was kind of like insurgency-based. And then we're like, hey, man, like, stop shooting at us and stuff, and we'll help you out, and we'll turn you into the hero of the city kind of thing.
Okay.
So we flipped him from the insurgency, and not all the insurgents bought into his ideology or whatever. And they were more aligned with like kind of the radical Islam aspect of it. And so, but he began taking his guys and plugging them in as like Iraqi police chiefs and everything else. Yeah. And it began to really turn the tide of the area in the war. And then we used that model over the rest of Iraq.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting to hear that piece of the puzzle, because most of the guests that I have on, it's all actions at the objective. Kind of the more 30,000 foot view is rarely discussed, which is fascinating, especially for me, because I've heard so much of the door kicking stories over the years. But
that's the thing people miss. Like,
yeah, I mean, it's there's a lot of different facets,
Yeah, like wars are won not just through like covert operations and door kicking, but also through diplomatic aspects and being shrewd enough to like get people to turn. Yeah. To complete the war effort.
I would say, not that it's even necessary to pick one over the other, but I think, the civil affairs and PSYOPs angle, I would argue is more important, particularly if you are fighting a dedicated opponent, because they're going to fight until they're all dead. So you're either going to have to kill them all or figure out, what a compromise or some sort of negotiation, that everybody can kind of come to the table with and understand what they want. Because it could be something simple, like while we're sitting here trying to kill each other for a decade, maybe they wanted something that we don't mind giving them, and it's that easy of a fix, and to me, this is kind of one of those examples where what do we give a shit if, we do it that way, if it, allows us to accomplish our goals. Was he assassinated by his own guys, or how did he end up?
Yeah, he got killed by ISIS.
Okay.
So they plugged a IED, a bomb, like near a road to his house.
Okay.
And knew when his like convoy was coming up and killed him. We weren't really sad when it happened. That sounds terrible, but like Sitar had originally killed a assload of Americans, like a ton of American soldiers. So he's looked fondly on in the history books. Like there's even a Wikipedia page about how he brought up like the Sons of Anbar. But those of us who were there and were originally fighting were like, that guy was an asshole, man. Like, so it worked, but it's kind of like, imagine if you like had like an Osama bin Laden type character And then suddenly you flip them and you're just kind of like, he killed like a lot of our dudes, man. Yeah. So, but he was nice to me. He would always.
So in that regard, then it's kind of a dicey move on our part in terms of if there are soldiers who have lost guys to this guy, they're probably not going to be real keen on, you know, the Americans siding with him now and propping him up.
We never brought any of the infantry guys out into the actual compound for that very reason. Yeah. So anybody who was inside, it was people who objectively understood the mission, or they were higher level officials. So yeah.
When he was killed, did that completely derail everything that you guys had been working for, or
no? We had already predominantly pacified the city at that point.
So just somebody took his place and kept going on.
Right. And the other thing too is like he kind of became a martyr at that point. So it just pissed the Iraqi police chiefs off more and the Iraqi army. And so they wanted to just hamstring all the insurgency and you know, the terrorist cells in the area. So worked to our benefit. Yeah.
Was that towards the tail end of that deployment?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Any other door-to-door stories that you recall that are worth sharing?
I got one. So in my book, I wanted to tell, you know, I interviewed a ton of my guys to ensure accuracy, you know, points that I had forgotten. There's a story that I tell, and this will, you know, when we move into like veteran stuff and helping vets and whatnot, this will play a large part because I like to talk a lot about moral injury now, and I'll explain that. Moral injury is the psychological damage that occurs when soldiers have to do things that violate their sense of right and wrong, which is a lot of stuff we do in war. Like if you have to shoot a woman or child, you know, and they're carrying like an AK-47 or IEDs or whatever, there's a lot of impossible scenarios, I'm sure you know, in combat to where you go, I don't know if this was the right call. Did I just save my guy's life, or did I just, you know,
murder a civilian? Yeah,
murder a civilian. And that's what a lot of civilian populace doesn't understand. War is war is war is war. It looks different, but it's all the same. Yeah. So this is during Operation Kasserine, or no. Okay, I'll tell two. So during Operation Kasserine, when I'm with Major Scott Husing, my team gets split up. And this is one of those impossible like moral dilemmas that were really worked out to my benefit. We were running a civil military operations center where people come in and get claims and stuff, and we're trying to, you know, build those connections and gather intelligence. And so we're working with like different teams. Sometimes the SEALs would come out with us. Sometimes asymmetrical warfare would come into that. So there was this little girl. She was probably my daughter's age, probably around. Actually, I think she was younger than 6 or 7. And she would always wear this yellow dress, and she would pick daisies and give them to us. We called her the flower girl. And so a lot of soldiers were reminded of their kids back home. So they'd give her chocolate and hugs and everything. She's always hanging around. Really cute. Just dark jet black hair. Kind of frazzled and nasty because, you know, but she was sweet and loved hanging around American soldiers. So when we're doing this clearing op, we end up on this road called Millions, and it's a permanently black road. You just don't go down it. And luckily I had been there long enough. Well, the Marines want to go down it. And I'm like, what the fuck are we doing? So finally, we go up to the lieutenant, and I'm like, look, we know that this is your op and everything. We're going to die. So, and we're like, look around. They're starting to stage. And so they call in to the cop nearby, which is where we normally were hanging out at. And they're like, you're on Millions. They're like, you got to get off that road. You're going to die. So they're like, well, where do we go? And they're like, rally point at Copsdale with us, you know, and that's a 1st Infantry Division. So we know all the guys there. So the Marine platoon we're with, we book it. Like we start running because we're like, you can tell an attack's getting set up. And I'm like, we got to go now. We're all going to die. Cause we have no cover whatsoever. We're on this road, and like to the bank down there is just like this like ditch of like water, of sewage. I mean, bad. So luckily we get out of there somehow. Once we get to Copsdale, I meet up with the first sergeant there, who I'm a buddy with, and he's like, hey man, like, are your dudes with that other Marine team? And I was like, yeah. He's like, they're taking fire right now. I was like, crap. So we go up to the roof. We start taking fire. Wow. So we're like returning fire. There's this moss that's right next to it, and that moss constantly aggravate. So they start doing this call over the radio. So all the like insurgents start getting riled up. We're taking shots and everything. I'm running an EOTech. He's running an ACOG, or I don't even remember what he was running. It was just a higher powered scope. But I'm shooting down this alleyway, and he goes, hey, hold. He's like, cease fire. I was like, all right. And he hands me his rifle, and he's like, take a look. And so I look, and it's the flower girl. She's in the alley, and she's carrying munitions.
Oh, wow.
And she's going towards where my dudes are, where there's, and I have a photo of this, where these smoke plumes are.
Do you have it that you could send?
Yeah. These smoke plumes are billowing the distance from, I took it after that moment, like after this whole thing went down, because I was like, but yeah, these smoke plumes are billowing in the background, and that's where my dudes are. And she's heading that direction. And he just looks at me and he goes, "You can shoot her technically." And I'm like, and I just, what do you do? You know, it's angel, demon on the shoulder.
Do you know what munitions she was carrying?
I couldn't really see. There were some wires and some other stuff, and I don't know. But
I mean, how did you know for sure that it was munitions?
She had done it before.
Oh, okay.
So we knew,
yeah.
But nobody had ever shot her, you know, because, I mean, the ROE was clear, but she didn't know better. Like, her family's getting paid for that stuff and whatnot. And so I go, you know, eventually I just don't say anything. I just hand him the rifle back. He goes, "You're sick fuck." And he was like, "It's cool. We don't shoot kids, man." And I was like, I know that's not true, because one of my buddies was a sniper over there, and he had a kid rush him one time. And but you know, nobody at that outpost, because we knew her. We just knew she didn't know any better. But the worst part was my dudes are in contact. And so I didn't find this out till later. So it's two of them. They're stuck on a rooftop. And it's 2 versus 20. And they're just getting shellacked, enough to the point to where my corporal, there was this drainage where he had been peeing through. He's like low crawling the whole time. And he had to like get his rifle through this like PVC pipe where he'd been pissing. He's like, the whole time ammonia is just burning my face. And he's like, and I'm shooting these guys out through this piss hole. Wow. Until the Marines reinforced them and then take it all out. But yeah, she was heading that direction. And to this day, like, you know, I'm really proud of the decision I made, but what would I have done if one of them had gotten killed? Like, would I blame myself for the rest of my life and been like, that was my fault, I should have shot her, and she reinforced them, and like all this other stuff. And so that's like kind of one of the impossible situations. And then my other team, Gonzo, I'll tell his story real quickly. This was the ending engagement of the Battle of Ramadi. So like the Battle of Ramadi was fought from 2006 to 2007, basically. And it was just that gnarly time in Ramadi. And like the Marines, like it's weird. Like for GWAT veterans, they kind of like put it up there with like the Battle of the Bulge almost. Yeah. Like for the Marine Corps birthday message the other year, they were like, whether we're fighting in like Iwo Jima, and they're listing all these like historical battles, and then they end or on the streets of Ramadi. And I was like, dang, all right, are we these guys now? Yeah. So. But it is just because it was crazy. Like everybody who was there talks about how crazy it was. I mean, I know Jocko does it. You know, Chris Kyle was there. That's where he earned his nickname, the Devil. But here's the thing that you have to understand, and I want people to understand. Ramadi was a turkey shoot. Like I knew guys that had 50, 60 confirmed kills that were snipers there during their deployment, just because of like the ROE was so permissive, and there were just so many fighters to kill. Like. So the last operation is called this thing Operation Murfreesboro, and it's the closing engagement of the Battle of Ramadi, and it's with Manchu down at Camp Corregidor. And that's where my buddy Kit McVeigh and Paul Gonzalez were. And so they go out. And, I mean, this thing gets violent. There was this place called Eagle's Nest. And the thing that people don't realize is, like, we didn't have control of that city. There was literally like a demarcation zone in the city. There was a line. So for 2 years, there was water spraying up in this one area of the city that we could never get to because you would be shot dead. They just controlled that part of the city. So you never went over there. So we're like, we got to wrest control back from these idiots and go there. So they go out that night, and they are in the middle of this area. There's smoke going. Bradleys are going. All of a sudden, they just, like, Paul on this team, he's with, the Manchu soldiers, and they just start taking crazy fire. Well, McVeigh, who's also a corporal, he instinctively kneels in the middle of the road. Everybody scatters to, like, get cover. And then he's like, oh my God. And he runs in, and Gonzo just starts, he's dumping rounds in this building. And they get back, and so they're like, the whole platoon is scattered to the four winds, and so Gonzo's in charge now of these Manchu soldiers, and it's like probably like 7 of them, and he's like, they're like, where do we go? And he's like, because they don't have a radio man, they don't know where they're going anymore. They're just like alone there in the street. So they're like, we gotta go. So Gonzo's like, we're booking it over to this building, and so he sends the Manchu guys across first, and then he's like. We're going to be the last to cross, because that's the type of leader Gonzo is. He's like the Hal Moore, where he's like, I'm going to be the first on and the last, the first off and then the last, So McVeigh and him, it's 2 CA guys. The rest he sent the infantry guys on by himself, which is crazy when you think about it. So he's like, I'll cover you. You guys run. So McVeigh books it across the street. It's this wide open area. And he sees a couple of the guys stopped in the middle of the road, and they're taking fire, but there's a soldier down. And so Gonzo books it past him, starts returning fire on the opposite side to cover them, laying down suppressive fire. And McVeigh grabs this injured soldier and drags him to the building, with these other soldiers. They end up they reconvene with everybody, and everybody's frazzled at this point. Well, it's a soldier they know. His name's Private Luis Kim. He's a young Asian American. He's 19 years old, right? So the medic is with them. He totally flips out, loses his shit. And the lieutenant's like yelling at him. He's like, I gotta know, what's up? Well, Gonzo, again, medic training. He was a medic. He just goes to work with the surgical precision that he is. Like I said, he's the Iceman, and McVeigh's there with him too. And we had had all to do combat lifesaver stuff, and we knew the basics of medical triage. And so they're looking for exit wounds. Well, Kim had been shot in the back of the head. So he starts seeing it. He's moving it. He plugs the wound with gauze and everything. And then the medic finally snaps out of it, and he's like, he's got to go now, sir. He's like, he's not going to make it. So they call up the Bradleys. At this point, the whole city's exploding. Like, just tracer rounds, just gnarly. And you would go to bed at night, and you would just see tracer rounds all over the city. It was just a constant firefight. So Gonzo, and again, this is just a CA dude. He goes, I've got this. And he goes, he hoists Kim over his shoulder. And he has to book it down the street with a medic in tow to the Bradleys, taking fire the whole time. And so he makes it, lays, Kim into the Bradley with the guys there. The medic jumps in. He's alone in the street. Oh. And he has to run back and then continue the firefight. Yeah. Kim unfortunately died. Yeah. They kind of knew it when he was there, but I think that's the tough part is McVeigh risked his life to save that soldier's life, and they didn't award him crap for anything. And it's just you hear stories about that, about young guys risking their lives and sticking their necks out and whatnot. And we put him in for awards and stuff, and like the top brass are like, nah, but you know, you got dudes that are getting silver stars that are general for doing their job. And I look at guys, and that's why I tell their stories, because I'm like, those guys are heroes in my book.
Yeah.
I look at them, and even though they didn't get the awards or accolades that they deserve, I want other people to know their stories, because their stories matter and they were important, and they may never write it. But it was just environments like that where we would just get stuck in weird, impossible situations. Gonzo, though, I mean, he was doing crazy stuff. So throughout the entire time, he has 3 Bronze Stars. 2 of them have Valor devices on them for heroism under fire. I mean, the dude's just a legend in our community. Was
your Bronze Star from a specific operation, or was it from the deployment? Or
it was from the Battle of Ramadi. Yeah, so it was just 2 of my guys, Wagner and Starnes, they have Bronze Stars with Valor during the Battle of Ramadi for just the amount of engagements that they were in. And, you know, mine was just the amount of operations and combat and engagements that I was in. It wasn't, I don't think I did anything particularly too heroic. You know, I think I was just doing my job, but my 4-man team walked out and I didn't think we were going to get anything. But when you know, and I tell their stories in the book, you know, there's more that I could tell, but that I had to fight, because Starnes was an E4. I had to fight for him to get his Bronze Star with Valor and really justify it as his team sergeant. And luckily my lieutenant did too, because I was like, he did way more heroic shit than I did. And you know, he's a 19-year-old kid at the time. So I you know, those 2 guys, if you go to bat, and again, that was a lesson I learned from Gonzo. I went to bat. He went to bat for me. I'm going to go to bat for my dudes. Yeah. And so it was really cool. And luckily, I think the civil affairs commander who is in Baghdad at the time, he was a colonel. His name was Colonel Pennells. Great dude. Unfortunately, he died a couple years ago, just a heart attack kind of thing. A really, really great leader. Yeah. He had been hearing the stories of what we had been through. And when we sent that all stuff up and we talked to him, he was like, yeah, this is absolutely justified, and I want to see these men taken care of. So I think there are really good enlisted and really good officers that take care of Joe, and they'll do the right things, and they do things based on merit. And then there are others who just like, I mean, that was the part that I always felt guilty about. I knew dudes that just risked their life and their neck, and they got no awards, no accolades, nothing. And then like they're, you know, OIC was sitting in an air-conditioned base doing PowerPoint, and they're like, oh, you get a Bronze Star, or you get, you know, a Joint Commendation Medal for, and I was like, there was nothing really that they did that warranted that, but it was just because of rank and stuff. And so that was the unfortunate part. But again, it all comes back to, you know, take care of your guys, and they'll take care of you. Yeah. And that was the biggest thing that I learned was like and that Gonzo instilled in me too, was like, if you will take care of your men, they will follow you to the very gates of hell. Yeah. So.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a damn good lesson to learn, no doubt about it. You were married at that time, and your wife at that time left you during that deployment?
Yeah.
How did that go down? And was it as big of a kick in the nuts as it sounds like it would have been?
It was a giant kick in the nuts. Yeah, it was 3 months shy of coming home. And I called home, and she was like, hey, I've been doing counseling, and my counselor thinks I should leave you. And I was like, who the fuck is your counselor? This is the worst advice I've ever heard.
I would say it's pretty atypical also. Like usually it sounds like an excuse to me, but
yeah,
you know, most, like, I don't know of any counselors that would actually recommend that. You know,
right.
But
I think there was more to the story that you know, I'm not going to go into the and one, I don't want to make disparaging remarks about her or whatever. The thing was when I went through it was I'll tell you what happened, and then I'll tell you the process of healing through that. But I literally, you know, 3 months shy of coming home, and those last 90 days, you know, first 90 days and last 90 days of deployment is when people get killed. Yeah. And so I call home, and she's like, hey, I'm leaving. Divorce papers are on the way. I was like, I mean, out of the blue for me, you know? And I'm like, what? You know, so my life falls apart. And I remember I walked out of the talk, It's late at night. I'm the only person in there. And like I get off the phone and I just scream and I pick up a chair and I fucking throw it against the wall or shatter the thing. And then I walk out and I'm just mad and I'm raging. And then the grief finally hits me. I start crying. And I just remember I'm crying next to this big green generator. And I remember just thinking, and I'm watching my tears fall into that sand, that moon dust, that fine silt, and just watching it just absorb. And I was like, this place eats lives in more than one way.
How long had you been married at that point?
About 2 years.
2 years. Was it a complete fucking surprise?
Yeah.
So like you hadn't had problems and kind of talked about maybe we shouldn't be together. It was just all of a sudden like, yeah,
so at the time I would say that. So we always kind of had like a toxic relationship. She was a military brat. Like her dad was a full bird retired colonel in the Air Force who flew F-16s. I mean, he was legit.
Yeah.
And her brother was out in, I think, Haditha when I was there at the same time.
Yeah.
He was not happy with her when it happened. And we stayed friends. And I think the family was just kind of in shock. But I had bought into the ideology that, relationships this person should make me happy, as opposed to realizing there's a lot of compromise and sacrifice and other things. And so much of my life, I think to that point, was about me and what I wanted to do. And when I eventually went through counseling and everything, I had to realize that I contributed to the downfall of that relationship as much as possible. And she eventually learned, like, oh, asshole, like you left you had to go play soldier and run off to a war again because you couldn't deal with your shit at home.
Yeah.
And that's fair.
Yeah.
And I realized that I made a lot of the relationship about me, and it always takes two to tango. But once I realized that, I developed a lot more compassion and empathy for her as far as everything. But coming home was awful. She wouldn't pick me up from the airport. I had to rent a fucking car. She had bought a house while we were away. I'd given her power of attorney, and we were like, yeah, we're going to start a family. We're going to have kids. So I have to get a map. The iPhone had just come out. I still had a flip phone and everything. I just turned it back on. So she had moved down to Houston to be with her family, and I'm transitioning out of active after this point. I'm going to go into the reserves. And I'm like, and I was going to transfer to a reserve unit up in Dallas, Texas, was what I was doing. And I was like, oh my God, like my life is over. And I was like, I have to rent a car, get a map, figure out where I live, just because I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is terrible. And nobody's there to greet me at the airport. And the worst part was I'm like renting this car, and my uniform is like bleached white from the Iraqi sun at this point. And the poor chick at the counter, she's like, oh, you just get back, and she's like, Iraq, Afghanistan, and I was like, Iraq this time, and she was like, she notices my like ring because I'm still wearing it and stuff at that point, and she goes, oh, I bet your wife's gonna be happy to see you, and I go, yeah, not really.
Yeah. Fuck, I don't think I would have been wearing it.
I was trying to work things out.
Yeah.
I wanted to try and work things out, and it just did not happen. So, but yeah, so the cool part about that story is, so while I'm crying next to this stupid generator, my first sergeant finds me. His name's First Sergeant Greg Shanahan. This dude's Superman. He got testicular cancer while he was there, went home, beat it, because we were doing 15-month deployments at that time, came back and took us all home.
Wow.
Yeah. We called him Superman or Old One Nut, depending on whether we wanted to,
Fuck him or not.
Yeah. So he comes back, he finds me, and I'm like, I gotta go home. I can fix this. And he's like, he just holds me, and he lets me cry on his shoulder. He's big dude. And I'll never remember what he said. Never forget what he said. He said, "You're not alone, and we'll go through this together."
Yeah.
So, but I had to stay and finish my deployment. They're like, "Look, man, people's wives leave them all the time over here. You can't just go home just because."
Yeah.
And eventually, Wagner pulled me aside, I'd started slipping on missions, and he goes, "Hey man, can I talk to you for a second?" I was like, "Yeah, dude, what's up?" And he goes, "You're slipping on missions." And I go to object, and he goes, "Let me finish. You know it, and I know it." And I was like, "All right." And he's like, "You know how sorry we are that your wife left you. You know that, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, dude." And he's like, "If you don't get your head in the game, though, you're going to get us all killed." And I was like, "All right." So I had to get my head back in the game. It was rough, really rough. And so, but I got home, tried to work things out, and it just didn't work out. So my best friend from college, the night I arrive home, she's there to let me in to the house. And I'm in uniform, look awful. And, I'm like, I'm on leave at this point. Cause we'd been at Bragg and finished out the demo process. And I'm like, I got to fly to Houston. So I fly and, I'm doing all my leave time, my terminal leave. And, her brother's there probably just to make sure I'm not violent and crazy. And once he realizes I'm not, he was like, "All right, I'm gonna leave. You guys can talk." And so eventually when he leaves, I'm just like, "We can make this work." And she gets mad, and she was, kind of starts a fight thing. And then eventually she goes, "Look, here's the deal. I don't love you anymore." And that was it. That's when I realized it was really over. And she's like, "Divorce papers are on the coffee table. I suggest you sign them." And I'm like, "Oh my God, this has got to be the worst homecoming ever."
Yeah.
And so I'm literally sitting there on this couch. The house is empty too. She's moved all of her stuff out. And she's like, "You can keep and she had been the one who's decorated. I hate Paisleys to this day for this very reason. She liked Pottery Barn stuff, and she loved Paisleys. And I was like, we had this red Paisley bedspread, and I was like, "Fuck this bed, fuck everything in this house." I'm just mad. And I had, my flip phone, one of the Motorola Razors or whatever, and it rings, and I just, turned it back on from getting overseas. And it's my best friend from college. And he's like, "Ben, oh my God, thank God, dude." He's like, "Where are you?" I was like, "I'm in Houston." And he's like, "Are you alone?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he was like, don't stay at that house, man." He's like, "Drive to Austin right now." And he's like, "I got a case of beer and a pot of coffee. We'll talk all night." He's a civilian, And I'm like, "I don't know, man." He's like, "What do you have left for you there?" And I was like, "All right, I'll see you in 2 hours, man." So I'm in this rental car, still in uniform, duffel bags in the back.
Yeah.
And I just drive to Austin. I started living on his couch, man. Yeah. And I'm hitting all those weird veteran stereotypes, where I'm drinking myself stupid every day. I spiral into depression. I want to die. And I come to this epiphany, and I tell a lot of veterans this that are struggling with suicide ideation, is suicide is actually a state of ambivalence. Part of you wants to live and part of you wants to die. That's the human nature, fight or flight, right? And it's very true that part of you wants to die. If you tell somebody about this, a stronger part of you actually wants to live. If you mention it, I have these feelings or these emotions, that is your survival primal instinct going, you should live.
Yeah.
And if you tell somebody, that shows that the stronger part of you wants to live. But I didn't care about any of that stuff at the time. I hadn't been through any coursework or whatnot. I was just some soldier getting home. But what I realized, and this is the thing that I tell a lot of people now, is I had this moment where I was literally sitting on the couch, and I was like, everyone would be so, I'm going through my own mental funeral and everything. Everyone would be so sad. She's going to realize how she fucked me, all this other stuff. And I had this epiphany, and I believe it was from God now, where I just realized if I take myself out, I'm going to give the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and the insurgency the win that they have always wanted. And then I was like, I'm not going to let those cocksuckers win. Yeah. And I tell people that now. I'm like, if you take yourself out, you let them win. They don't even have to do anything. They're not even shooting at you. You took yourself out.
Yeah.
And so, even though I kind of had this desire to live, like my mental health like really kind of just went downhill. I was depressed. I was drinking to mask like my problems. You know, I'm crying in the shower at my buddy's place, thinking he can't hear me. I'm like, I'm not gonna let him, but he totally can. And just, you know, one day, it was super funny. He's an atheist, and I was like agnostic at best. But he's like, hey, man, can I take you to church? And I was like, I don't know what this is going to do for either one of us. And he was like, I don't know. Maybe you can meet a nice Christian girl or whatever. But anyways, he ends up taking me to this church that I really enjoy because I had grown up in that environment that I didn't enjoy. And I meet these two dudes that just really changed my life, and they were civilians. And they'd been through the gauntlet, the ringer in life. And what I began to understand was that suffering is a universal language. We all go through something in some way, shape, or form. And my friend Josh, his family, he'd grown up. His dad was an alcoholic. His parents were largely aloof. They were hoarders, like bad hoarders, enough to where like the TV show wanted to go to their house and do it. And then his parents died. He'd always had this, within like months of each other, he had this estranged relationship, didn't know what he was going with. And then like he admits to me like, hey man, I'm in counseling. I just want you to know that if I come off like a dick sometimes, or if I just ghost you, like this is why. Yeah. And I was like, oh man. Like, and so as he began to like kind of just open up to me, like it caused me to open up to him, and he didn't like coddle me and act repulsed by like the stuff that I had been through. And I just remember telling him a particularly haunting story about like the Iraqi police, like torturing this dude. And he didn't act put off or weirded out. He just leaned across the table and was like, I imagine that was a really difficult thing that you've been through. And the past couple of years have been really hard, man. Sorry that you've endured that. And I was like, oh man, this is what I need, kind of thing. And then with him being in counseling and encouraged me to get into counseling, and with time, like I began to heal. And I just began to surround myself with people that were, and I like to call them wounded healers. Like it's like healing people heal people, whereas wounded people wound people. And so I started surrounding myself with the people that were interested in what I like to call now post-traumatic growth, where like they're not wallowing in misery, they're not numbing out with substances or anything of that nature, and they want to grow better with time. And man, those dudes really just changed my life. And then I had to wrestle with the ramifications of what I had done in combat, that moral injury. Because everybody's labeling stuff post-traumatic stress disorder these days. And I'm like, okay, that does not meet a clinical definition of post-traumatic stress. Post-traumatic stress is it's a stressor to a traumatic incident that happens that triggers something. So like, well-known example is woman gets raped in a dark alley, right? And so she won't go down dark alleys. Veterans fireworks, that kind of thing. And one of the things that you do over time, one of the treatments that you can do is it's expose stimuli to it. And it's where it's incrementalism of it. So like little bits of firework or going past an alley or whatever, to where you become desensitized to it. But it's specifically an incident that happens. Like it could be a car wreck, where you're like afraid to get in the car or whatever it is again. But you have these guys coming out that are never seen combat or they've been through combat, and then they start labeling it like resistant treatment post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's not what happened. They're carrying a lot of guilt and shame because of the actions that they had to do overseas and never dealt with that. And that's moral injury, the psychological damage, the bruise on the soul that happens when you have to do really violent actions against things that you normally wouldn't do, or watching your friends die. Like there was something I forgot to mention. My best friend was killed when I left Afghanistan. And I had never really dealt with that. And he replaced me.
So were you there when it happened or no?
No. So he was my replacement.
Yeah.
And I got home, he got killed a week later. And I was like, it should have been me.
Yeah.
And I blame myself for years, dude. Yeah. Just years of carrying that guilt and that baggage around. And so as I really kind of begin to figure these things out, I realized that I have to do a better job of dealing with this stuff and growing, because there's nothing courageous about staying stuck. And the inner coward in me wants to stay stuck.
Yeah.
It's the one that doesn't want to put to death all the things that plague me. And I think that's where, unfortunately, a lot of veterans get to this point where, as opposed to go, and this is the part that doesn't make any sense to me. We're literally told, you are strong enough to go overseas and fight this crazy insurgency and endure hardships and you know, the hardest environments that you could ever deal with your life. But then you come home and you're too weak to deal with the most comfortable environment of your life. And like, we're going to drug you to death and put you in an altered reality because you can't handle comfort? That doesn't make sense. And so for me, I do a lot towards growth and healing and working with veterans and you know, using different techniques from, you know, cognitive behavioral therapy to just motivational interviewing is another style that I like to use to help them process through like what they've been through. And then there are also great entities and organizations like Warriors Heart is a great one, Heroes and Horses, that are doing the work that get people to deal with that area. But for me, when I came home, I was like, this isn't post-traumatic stress. Why am I carrying so much guilt and shame around? And I didn't talk about the war until 2016.
You just buried it.
Just buried it. I was like, I'm going to get busy living. I'm going to do work.
Yeah.
But the problem is when you do that, it festers.
When you just said get busy living, it reminded me of Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah.
You have to have heard that before.
Oh, yeah.
In your best impression, can you say it'd be a lot cooler if you did?
Be a lot cooler if you did.
God,
Everyone
awesome.
says I sound kind of like him, so.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, the sound is part of it. Just your facial expressions, mannerisms, et cetera, are the other part of it.
All right.
Yeah, classic, man. Plus, you were in Austin for a little while.
Yeah.
It just all fits. So a couple things. The incremental desensitization stuff is kind of a primary mechanism that we use in dogs for the same thing, is that, you know, they have simple association triggers, but the treatment is very similar in that regard. I'm curious, what were the Iraqi police guys doing torture wise? Just real quick, I don't want to spend a ton of time.
They were the one that we witnessed, like, and same thing. This is their rules, you know. Ripped a lamp wire out of the wall that was still plugged in and just.
Like, killed him or just shocking him?
Nah, shocked the shit out of them.
Yeah.
Like, they were just doing torture methods.
Yeah, I got you.
Because we, you know, enhanced interrogation, we were out of that stage.
Yeah.
Now, did we do that while we were in Afghanistan? 100%.
Yeah.
I wasn't a part of it. I witnessed a lot of it. I was like, I'm going to Abu Ghraib, you know, kind of thing. But, you know, the way that they got around that is they just said Iraqi culture, their thing. And so the police chief and let them do. Yeah. So.
You mentioned motivational interviewing. Can you talk about what that is?
Yeah. So motivational interviewing is a technique that a lot of therapists will use where, so we as humans, or when you get into kind of these spirals, like these death spirals of negative thinking, thought patterns and everything, we'll have a tendency to catastrophize. And so the psychologist, Martin Siegelman, he did this Pavlovian response thing with dog. I'm not going to get into it, but really, really interesting. When we go through difficult situations to where we won't change, we personalize it. This is my fault. We think it's prevalent, like this is going to last forever. And, or personalization, man, I'm blanking on it. It's the third one. It's 3 P's. But basically we internalize it. We end up believing that it's all our fault, and then that it's going to be pervasive for the rest of our lives and that nothing will change. And it kind of works like on the flip side of the everything is awesome song. It's like everything is awful, everything, you know, and it's just going to suck. And so veterans will kind of get into kind of those negative thought patterns and thinkings and everything else, and they'll begin to tell them a story that's not true. So motivational interviewing is almost like a judo move, to where you take exactly what they're saying and you flip it on them. So like when I was working a lot with teenage and 20-something women who were self-harming or cutting is the big one. One of the things that they would say is, it's not that big a deal. Or I can quit whenever I want. And I go, okay, cool. So if I went to your best friend right now and told them what you were doing, they would say it's not that big a deal. And they're like, well, no, that's motivational interviewing. So it's taking their distorted thinking and their patterns and then using it in a manner against them, almost like jujitsu and like where you screw up, and then flipping that on them. And so it's this interviewing tactic where you're asking these leading questions that show them their disordered thinking and destructive patterns and how they're catastrophizing.
Huh. Can you give me another example of that?
Yeah, so veterans, like, great one is like, oh, I can quit drinking whenever I want. It's, I didn't have that many drinks. And I was like, all right, cool. So would you let me get in the car after having like 6 beers and drive? Well, no. Then why is it okay for you to do that?
Yeah. I gotcha.
Yeah.
It's called motivational interviewing.
Motivational interviewing. It's great. Yeah. You roll. It's like rolling with their resistance.
Yeah. It's like Aikido.
Uh-huh.
All right. So you didn't start talking about your experiences really until 2016.
Mm-hmm.
As you kind of worked through the transition, obviously you had some struggles. Was there a catalyst that really kind of catapulted you from struggling, having issues? You talked about the 2 guys at church. I mean, was that it? Was there anything else that really made you say, fuck, I want to get involved in the psychological aspect, the therapy aspect, the advocacy and outreach, et cetera?
It was just guys that I knew that were dying by suicide.
Yeah.
That was a big one. But I didn't talk about it. It was really, it was weird how it happened. So I had started writing, and I started writing on Medium, which is kind of a more left-leaning platform. It's left-leaning. We'll just call it what it is. But I have a really great relationship with the staff there, and they really like my stuff because I take a very balanced approach to everything. And so I started building an audience there, and I have about 50,000 readers there now that read my work and my essays and different stuff. And I've written for different publications, from the Daily Wire to CNN and stuff like that. But my editor, let me back up. In 2016, I wrote this essay, and it's when I had learned about moral injury and post-traumatic stress and everything, and it was Memorial Day was coming up, and so I wrote this big, long essay, and I told this story of myself. I told the flower girl story, the girl in the yellow dress, to begin with, and then my buddy Andy, who had been in Fallujah, and we were the 2 vets that kind of knew each other in Austin. There's not much, you're the big ones. There's Tim Kennedy out there and all the other guys, but most of Austin is just not veterans. You can go up to Killeen and stuff, but
there's a shitload there now.
Yeah, apparently,
sure.
yeah.
But
yeah, there's so many clothing companies and stuff that are out there now. Yeah, but we're talking but back in the day, it was I knew maybe 5 of us. There was 5 of us.
Yeah.
And I felt alone. And the catalyst for me also was I had befriended this priest when I was in Ramadi.
American?
Yeah. Yeah, he was an American priest. He was a Vietnam veteran. His name was Father Dennis Rochford. He had gone in with a company. He was an infantry grunt in Vietnam. Company of 150 men, right? Him and 6 other dudes lived through the Tet Offensive. Combat wounded, whole 9 yards. And I was like, what made you become a priest? He's like, Tet Offensive. I was like, all right, cool, man. We just really hit it off. And I asked a lot of questions about spirituality and whatnot. And he put a lot of thought in my mind, because this is, and I'll get back to the point I need to tell this though. He made me wrestle through the psychological and spiritual ramifications of war. We don't think about that. This is what a lot of well-intentioned clinicians are missing. Human beings are complex, We are emotional, intellectual, physical, and I believe spiritual beings. And he said, look, and I came to, and he was explaining all of this, and I came up with my own analogy eventually, is war is actually a very spiritual experience, because in some way, shape, or form, it's like playing God. You have the power to protect life or to take it away. Now, regardless of your belief system, whether you're Christian, Buddhist, Muslim, secular humanist, whatever it is, there's no formative consensus about like what happens when we die. We think we know. I think I know with 100% certainty as well, but there's not like a scientific consensus. We call it the great unknown, right? If you point an M4 carbine rifle at a man and you pull the trigger, you're sending him to the great unknown, and there's something deeply spiritual about that. And I was like, oh man, this is good. I need to wrestle through this. And so that's what really helped me start wrestling. But Dennis, which they let me call him Dennis, lifelong alcoholic, on and off the wagon. He came home and killed himself, jumped off a bridge.
It's a friend of yours?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was the priest.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the priest. And I'm like, that was the thing. He was the only Catholic priest in the area, so he was doing last rites constantly. And nobody asked him how he was doing. I mean, he'd been through Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, Desert Storm, like everything. And he took care of everybody else. Nobody took care of Dennis.
Wow.
And I mean, I get why he drank, you know, like he was trying to bury his demons. And I just remember, so I had gotten remarried. I always talked about this priest that had deeply impacted me, you know, to my wife. She's like, how come you haven't reached out to him? I was like, no, that's a great point. So I called. He had given me this Bible, and I kept it in a foot locker with like all my awards and stuff. Like I didn't have anything up. I was like, I'm just going to do work. Nobody needs to know that I'm a veteran, whatever. I'm not going to talk about it. I became like my grandfather. And so I go to the Foot Locker in the garage, and I pull it out, and I find the card he gave me. He had told me to stay in contact, call the parish. I walk up to my office, and I'm like, hey, I'm looking for Father Rochford. He was my chaplain while I was in Iraq. I promised I'd stay in touch. I didn't. I wanted to reach out, you know. There's silence on the other end. And I'm like, hello? And the woman goes, I hate to have to be the one to tell you this. He's passed. And I go, oh, how? And she goes, it's best if we remember the departed as they were. And if you're Catholic, you know like what that means. And I was like, at that point, I like just I'm like, how? Tell me how he died. And she was like, suicide. And then I found out the details. And, you know, my wife comes home. And at that point, like I'd stopped drinking. You know, I'll enjoy beer and different stuff here and there now, but I started drinking, and she came home, just found me wasted, and I'm just crying in a stupid mess. I just remember thinking, if there's no hope for him, is there any hope for me? And so it was shortly after that I wrote this article about moral injury and post-traumatic stress and what we've been through and how we do it. And it went stupid viral, like 1 million views, like it just got picked up by like all the veteran pubs and stuff. And I was like, oh, wow. I was like, that's great. I wasn't expecting anything. And so I went to my editor, Steph at Medium, and I was like, hey, I'm just looking for ideas. What do you guys want me to write on? And they're like, man, we love your war stuff. And I was like, what? I was like, you guys are like leftists. Like, you don't like war, like whatever. And she goes, I was like, I'm not going to write about that. I don't write about that. I don't talk about it. And she goes, it's a travesty. And I go, why? And she goes, you know that you're the smallest minority in the United States, right? Like even smaller than like American Inuit and like Eskimo and stuff like that. She's like, it's less than 1% of you that have been to war and seen combat. And she goes, we need to know about the humanity and the complexity and the barbarity of combat. And we don't know enough. And these stories are not told for us to either learn from it or avoid it. And she goes, because you guys stay silent. And she goes, and that's the travesty. We're going to lose all these stories we need to hear to the annals of history. And she goes, travesty. And that freed me up. I was like, okay, maybe I do need to write about this. And then also at the same time, McVeigh, who was the guy who dragged the Louise Kim from the street, had started like a little WordPress thing. And he was like, I don't want to die if, you know, I get sick one day and have my kids not know like what happened to me. And so he was just going over old maps and putting his stories up there. And I was like, that's really brave of him to do. And it just freed me up. And so I began writing about it, and people loved this stuff. Like every time I would write about war, they freaking loved it. And because people are curious, like one of my friends is the lead singer of a band called Silent Planet. His name's Garrett Russell. He's a pacifist, fascinated by war. The human nature is fascinated by war. He's like, yeah, I'll go see every war movie and read these books. I'm fascinated by it. He's even wrote lyrics to it. And he's like, I want to know. I think we need to know. And I just realized that even in fiction, you can be the most anti-war person ever, but you're going to go watch Avengers, you're going to watch Star Wars. That's all wars. Yeah. You know, there's something ingrained in the human psyche that is fascinated by it. And we need to learn from it. And we need to hear from our veterans and everything. And so I began writing about it, which turned into, getting an agent and a book deal. So it was crazy.
Yeah. Before we get into the book, there's one question I wanted to ask about, kind of in particular, that the transition process for veterans is, I would say, historically difficult. And a lot, I'd say most people understand that, have some grasp that, that transition phase from your identity being a military service member to where now you're not. And, some guys struggle really, really difficult times with that. Some don't. There's a lot of studies and literature on why that's the case, and that could be debated or studied forever. From your perspective, between what you went through writing the book, the advocacy stuff that you've done for years, if you personally could develop a strategy, a protocol for transitioning people out of the military, specifically combat veterans, what does that look like to you? Like, let's say you're the Department of Defense transition expert, and they say, Ben, develop a protocol for transitioning combat veterans from the military into civilian existence. What does that look like? And I'll caveat or preface that with, I know that it's gonna vary from person to person, but from kind of a 30,000 foot view, is there some highlights that you would?
Well, you put me on the spot. There's some problems in society we have to address first. So one of the most jarring things for me, when I got out, I moved into geopolitical intelligence. Go figure. I ended up working for a company called Stratfor Rain. Loved it there. One of my coworkers, and he's still one of my clients, one of my closest friends is a guy named Peter Zion. He's a geopolitical expert, and we still debate each other. But, civil affairs, it makes sense. Like, that's what you go into. And I was doing graphic design. So I was like, at the time, like tracking cartel movements in like Mexico and understanding like, okay, the Sinaloa cartel and El Chapo control this area and whatnot and everything, but I would translate it graphically. So you had to have the mind and then the artistic expression for it as far as everything. And so I'm working with all these like very bright analysts and everything. Eventually we got hacked by Anonymous and whatnot. But this was the part, even being in that environment and as good as it was, and I love the people there, what I realized, nobody has my back. So if you transition out of the military into a civilian and corporate environment, consider the following. Most people are trying to stab their way to the top. Your CEO is trying to make profits over people. Now, we know in the military, leaders eat what?
Well, they should eat last.
They should eat last, yeah. And that's kind of ingrained in the psyche. The general's always going to do it, even if it's just for a PR look. But the good soldiers and the good leaders, they do that. And I was in an environment where I was with good leaders and good officers who emulated those characteristics and those traits. So I was of the assumption, this is the way that the world operates. And you have to remember that when you go into the military, you are stripped of an identity you have and given a new one. They're going to take away your clothes. They're going to shave your head. You're You're going to look like everybody else. They're going to break you down until you become exactly what they want you to be. And that new identity is formed. And so there's no way to reshape kind of that and ingratiate the civilian aspect. So when I got into the corporate environment, I was like, everybody is trampling over each other to get ahead. I was like, it's about, like the CEO will gladly toss out people to make an extra dollar. Like you look at every single like hedge fund in the world, or you look at most corporations now, that's the way they operate. The CEOs at the top are going to make bajillions of dollars and everything else. And everybody else is going to like, oh, I got to climb the corporate ladder. Fuck this guy, and so nobody had my 6. Leaders didn't eat last. And I was like, what the fuck, man? And that messed me up. So I didn't know to expect that. Like the way things are in the military are not the way that they are in the civilian world. And you have to remind people of that. So there has to be like some type of training, like, look, man, we know you're going into this. It doesn't operate this way. And you can't call people cocksuckers and knife hand them all the time. You're going to get fired. Yeah. And I think the reality of the situation is you get I meet a lot of guys in Colorado Springs. They're like, oh yeah, I'm service connected for post-traumatic stress. And I'm like, oh, what'd you do? And they're like, oh, I was in the Air Force and worked on computers. I was like, what? And that doesn't make sense. What they're dealing with are transition disorders. They don't know how to reintegrate into the civilian society because that new identity is formed. If I was the DOD, the thing that I had to do was, over your life, different identities are going to form. You might become a husband. That's an identity. You might become a father. That's a new identity. For me, I was the metalhead growing up, and this will bring it full circle. And I never thought that was acceptable, There's the veteran, the warrior side of me, but I didn't think that was acceptable to some people. You have got to learn how to ingratiate the aspects of you the same way that you're an emotional, intellectual, spiritual, physical being. You have to incorporate all those elements together. You have to incorporate your identity from the military to your civilian identity to everything else. You have to discover who you are. And there has to be a discovery process. Now, I think the special operations community is doing a really good job at this. And it's unfortunate for the rest. That's only like 1%. So you have like entities like Folds of Honor, right? And they go in and they take, I think it's Folds of Honor. My Steve's going through it right now, where they're basically they're doing a better job of transitioning out, and they work with these mentors. They begin to find civilian stuff, and they're able to transition into that civilian prospect a little bit easier, as opposed to just the like, hey, you're out, don't let the door kick you out on the way out, and then you struggle, you're living under a bridge or whatever. So there has to be some type of easement into that world at the same time. But specifically for combat veterans, like if you saw combat, like you need to deal with the shit you went through, because there's nothing brave about you staying stuck exactly where you are. Like that's the coward's way out. That's the crux of my book is I end with that way. The reason why I call it Where Cowards Go to Die is when you give your life in service to something bigger than yourself, whether to people, your family, or everything else, then there's a part of you that goes, no, life is about me. And it's about money or whatever it is. Well, that's a very selfish and cowardly way to look at it. And if you want to become and grow into the person, human being that you're meant to be, you're going to have to kill that inner coward. Now, on the flip side, if you choose to ignore that, you're just going to die as a coward. So, but either way, a coward dies. And so the thing that I had to realize was like, if I want to grow as a human being, then I've got to work on me and kill that inner cowardice every single day. The part of me that wants to be self-protective, the part of me that doesn't want to give my life in service of others. And the thing is like, veterans we're really good at navel gazing, where we're like, oh, my problems. And I discovered that once you get the focus off self and serve other people's, it leads to a lot more healing. And so I think if they could see it as another way to serve, because while you're in, it's simple, and it's like you have somebody telling you what to do, what to dress, where to be, and all of that. They've got to find a new way to serve. And then there are other, like I said, other entities and organizations that have these rehabilitative programs that allow veterans to go through that process, the 40 plus day rehabilitative processes that help them discover and reconcile those identities, and as opposed to numbing out with like drugs, alcohol, or whatever it is, social media. It can be anything. Everybody's got some type of crutch. There are healthy ones, and then there are unhealthy ones. You've got to figure that out. Yeah. You've got to grow. I don't know what the answer is. I know what the problems are, and haven't thought critically about it. So I'm not going to give an answer to be like, this is the solution. So
yeah, no, I think agreed. I mean, it's such a broad question, and everybody's experience and even needs are different. Having said that, I think there's enough similarities for the veteran experience transitioning into the civilian world to where there's some principles that I think apply and need to be adhered to with everybody. And I think you hit it fantastically. Did you find a sort of cathartic experience in writing the book? Was it therapeutic for you to write it?
Yeah, it was super therapeutic. And my wife didn't know a lot of the stories, and then she read it and was just like, dear God. It helped me put into words the experience, because my whole thing, like, nothing against you, I know you're a Navy SEAL. Our joke in the industry is if you're a Navy SEAL, you get a book deal.
Well, there's 4 of them.
You got 4 of them, baby.
Desk, so.
Yeah. And like, I love the guys. Like, Marcus, I was on his podcast. He did, they have amazing stories, but a lot of the guys are writing about specific instances, and it's like, you got Rob O'Neill who did shot Osama bin Laden, and then you've got Marcus who had lone survivor, single battle. What about the vast majority of people? And if you want civilians to understand, they need to understand the complexity, the barbarity, and the humanity that goes into combat scenarios and operations. And so for me, I was like, I don't want to write a story where it's just about one operation or I look like I'm a hero. I want to tell the truth. I want to tell it in all of its ugliness, to where I look like a dickhead sometimes, And that was hard for me to write. Yeah. But then there were other times it was super cathartic, but there were just times where I remember I was writing at this brewery. There's this veteran-owned brewery in Colorado Springs. And that's where I've finished up the book. And it's because the owner, he's a buddy of mine named Woody. Him and his wife met in Ramadi. And I was like, oh, man. And it's all veteran-themed brewery and everything. And I was like, this is a good environment to get my head back there. But dude, people walking sometimes, I'd be crying. I'd be like, don't look at me. Oh my God. Because I would get to a sad part in the story and I was like, this is stupid. Like, why am I crying in public? And then I'd have to like leave because I was embarrassed, or go to the bathroom. But it released a lot for me of the things that I kept inside. There are some areas I still need to work on. Kyle, who's in my book, that's my best friend who died, Kyle Sightsinger. My mom's talked to his dad. He was like my mom's other son, and we still have a tough time talking about him. Just because like he was so close. And she called his dad, let him know about the book, and he was like, yeah, I want Ben to call me, and I still haven't done it. I haven't, and I know that I'm taking the coward's way out right now. I got to take my own advice, and I'm going to, but it's just hard. Yeah. I haven't talked, we spent a lot of time together after he died for about a year. And his dad actually has my Purple Heart medal.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Cause I told him, I said, hey man, I don't want this. This belongs with Kyle. Yeah. So, and his medals. Yeah. So, I have the award. I don't have the actual medal. I've got the citation and everything, but his dad has my actual medal.
Oh, that's powerful. A couple of Patreon questions. M. Bush Vols says, I'd be interested in hearing if and how Ben uses dogs in any of his crisis response work.
So I haven't used dogs at all. Now, here's the thing. I know a ton of organizations, and, being with the military to the Purple Heart, you meet a lot of vets that have service dogs. So one of my friends was a sniper in Ramadi, and so service dogs, I think, are a huge thing. He can't hear a lot of times. And so he would freak out when people were coming up from behind him. That's a big thing. We don't like our backs exposed. and his service dog trained to like nudge him on the leg when people are approaching from behind and stuff like that. Things that he can't hear, other aspects. You know, we're pushing. My kids are really pushing for me to get a dog, a service dog, just because there's times where my back goes out or whatever, and I'm like, hey, like I need somebody to bring my shoes or stuff like that.
That's what kids are for.
Yeah, I know, and they're doing it, but the kids don't listen. Like at least the dog will listen. Yeah. I'll be like, hey, somebody help me.
Yeah. So going back to the dogs. You know, you mentioned the thing in Afghanistan, which you're right. That's a tough thing to hear.
Again, I didn't want to paint myself as a hero. I wanted all of it.
No, and I appreciate it.
And I had a dog at home.
Yeah, no, I appreciate.
I've owned multiple dogs.
Yeah. What I'm curious, you know, I've had, like I said, a lot of guests over the years that have talked about experiences in both Iraq and Afghanistan and elsewhere, and you know, a fairly, or I would say relatively common thing is there would be instances where, you know, it was an operational environment where they're on a target, you know, a dog, just wrong place, wrong time, kind of the lesser of two evils. They end up having to
put the dog down so it doesn't bark.
Put a dog down, you know, or it's attacking their dog or, you know, or whatever. You know, that is one of those, to me, very easily falls into that's a shitty part of war. You know, would love to not have to deal with that. Sometimes that's one of those collateral damages thing. You could argue that, you know, that, no, you didn't have to, whatever. But that, okay, I can at least rationalize that.
Yeah, you can't rationalize mine.
Well, but I will also say you're also the first guest that's ever mentioned something like that. You know, the one recurring theme with everybody that I've had on up until this point was that, you know, even the rural semi-feral, you know, dogs that would run around and sometimes harass them or come on base or whatever. In every other guest's experience, they're actually welcomed distractions. You're the first person that's ever said that it wasn't, and you guys even turned it into a game of actually taking these dogs' lives, which, you know, I'm not here to judge, but certainly pisses me off hearing it. Mm-hmm. But I'm curious, like, is that something you guys thought about, talked about? Because again, you know, most Americans.
I'll tell you how it happened. So we were running around the little airfield. Dogs got on base, very feral, started chasing the colonel, snapped at it, bit at him. You know, they have rabies and different stuff like that. And so he got pissed, ordered a sniper team up, put them all down. And then from there, I think it kind of gave us the agency to do horrible things like that.
Which is interesting. And a lot of the leap that I'm about to make, some people may scoff at or think is a ridiculous parallel. But to me, I think it's that mentality that you're taking guys who normally would never do shit like that probably either have dogs, grew up with them, have very, very positive associations.
Most of us did, yeah.
But are willing to do, like, to me, that's kind of the Nazi mentality of, well, it's coming from the top, and it's like this weird trickle-down domino effect of this weird mentality and groupthink that exists, and shit like that happens.
Yeah, and he didn't say anything. We just started doing it, you know? And it wasn't like a large, I don't know. I mean, you saw one person doing it, you're like, cool.
I mean, even that to me is strange, because I remember we were in an area, this was on my first deployment, we were in Dubai of all places. And
that story's in my book, by the way, the dog strike one.
Yeah.
So I was just like, look, man, I don't want to lie about this.
Yeah.
So, because I want people to see how easy it is to slip into the abyss and go, especially if you're just like, nothing matters.
Yeah. I guess where it surprised me was the mob mentality towards it. When we were in Dubai right after the Cole got bombed, and we needed explosive detector dogs to come in and help sweep the warehouses before we were loading all these pallets of gear for resupply onto USNS ships. There was a military working dog handler that came, had a dog, and he was, like, I don't know what circumstances led up, and none of us did, which was part of the problem, but he was what I would consider overcorrecting a dog, like in the middle of a fucking parking lot was jerking him around and correcting him really hard and going overboard. And the second all 16 of us saw that, like every one of us didn't say a word, dropped everything that we were doing and sprinted towards that guy to absolutely fucking destroy him. Like it pissed all of us off so bad to where like we were ready to fuck this dude up watching him, do this to this dog. And to me, like, again, hearing you say that, I'm baffled at the mob mentality groupthink of it.
So here's the other part that's weird. Like, we worked with military working dogs and bomb sniffing dogs, and those we were just absolutely like, oh, they're the best, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. It was like I don't know if it's because, again, I think early on in the war effort, you're pissed, everybody's the enemy. The culture, even at some degree, you think is the enemy. All these people are so backwards. They had Taliban training camps, and so like everything around them is evil. The people. Yeah. And I think what we did is we split our brain almost into two, to where we go, the military working dogs are the good guys, and if anybody had ever harmed one of them, I think we would have absolutely lost our shit.
Yeah.
I think, and then on the mob mentality other side, we just were like, oh. But here's the other thing too. Like, has anybody ever talked about this on your show? The Afghan culture of bakhtabazi? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Well, I guess describe or define what that is.
Where they rape little boys.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So it's, for your listeners, if you want to lose your mind, go watch the Dancing Boys of Afghanistan. You can find it online.
Yeah, it's horrible.
I think it's a 60 Minutes or CBS report or Frontline or one of those. Yeah. But yeah, basically they consider young boys to be just playthings.
Yeah.
And we had an incident where we had a couple snipers on a Connex, saw it happening. We're going to go kill this dude. And they said, we can't do that. This is Afghan cultural practices kind of thing. And so for them, it's a normal practice. They bought into it or whatever. And for us, it's abhorrent. And it's totally abhorrent. Like what the hell? And I can't believe that the American military was like, we're just going to turn a blind. There's a lot of stuff that we did that we turned a blind eye to that I'm not okay with. But then there are things, and again, this goes back to that moral injury. That was a moral injury for me, to where to this day I regret that decision of dog strike. And it was like joining in on the fun, and I was like, I'm going to be one of the guys, and we're killers, and like there's that shit. Now, granted, I've done EMDR and other stuff around it, so I don't feel that way anymore. But for a while, I didn't talk about it.
Yeah. To me, there's a strange irony. Maybe it's irony. Maybe there's a better or more apt word to describe it. But you mentioned a minute ago the disgust even with the culture. Even the culture becomes the enemy. Mm-hmm. To me, what doesn't line up is that, the Dancing Boys thing, you don't like saying that. Mm-hmm. Well, they hate dogs there. Why did you guys adopt that instead of hating it?
Right.
That's the one thing that it's like they do that. You'd think that there would be, because the way that they are with just saying dogs are filthy and whatever, and they don't value their lives the way we do in America, that you would be even more against and abhorrent towards that activity, and yet you jumped in on it.
Yeah. So here's the thing you have to realize, like, human beings by nature are semi-hypocritical, if we're going to be really honest. Like, the whole science is real crowd doesn't believe in science a lot of the times. Yeah. And they're like, and the believe women crowd doesn't believe women sometimes, and you're just like, what's going on here? Yeah, which is it? The right and the left, they do it no matter where you are on the political spectrum, you're going to do it at some point. And that's the thing that I had to realize in me. There's a very hypocritical nature, and all of us have that. And I have to, and again, as it goes back to the theme of my book, I have to put down that cowardice every single day. I have to own where I've screwed up. I have to be honest about where I botched things, and I have to make amends for that. That's part of that 12-step process too, to where you make amends, where you have wronged people, specifically. And so out of that, telling this story and letting people see, like, I hope it's a warning to them.
Yeah.
I hope it's a warning to where they go, man, look, like, you think you're not going to be, I was a sweet artistic kid growing up. And everybody wonders how the sweet artistic kid who played saxophone and thought Kenny G was dope starts running over dogs in Afghanistan.
It's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, to me, like at a minimum, it's both a cautionary tale and I think further speaks volumes to the complexity of the human psyche, especially in combat environments. You know?
Yeah. We do some really messed up stuff sometimes.
If you had not joined the military, where do you think you'd be today?
Any
idea?
Yeah, I'd be doing art and stuff. Like I wanted to draw comic books growing up.
Really?
Yeah, I was in every single art class. Like it was the nerdy art. I was beanpole skinny too, man.
Yeah, same here.
Like I loved comic books. I was nerdy before they were cool. Everybody's like, they're like, oh, it's a comic book. I was like, no, you weren't. You didn't get picked on for reading comic books.
Yeah.
Shut your mouth.
Yeah.
And like I collected them. I still have them, and I still read comic books. Yeah. But I love drawing. I loved art. I got made fun of for being the art, and I like all the time. Like I got pushed into lockers. I got beat up. I was bullied. Yeah. But it never deterred me, and that's what I do now. Is I got my degree in graphic design and electronic media. I build websites, I design logos, and all of that. I'm continually doing that. That's about half of my business, honestly, because of the fact that I was like, I honed that skill, and it was something that I loved. And again, this goes back to that identity thing. There's always been an artistic, creative side of me, and I had to incorporate that with the warrior side of me. And I tell people this now, like, I believe a lot of men should be warrior poets when you think about that. Because, and depending on who you are, a lot of times you're either going to lean harder towards the warrior side or towards the poet side. And there's nothing wrong with either one of them. It's just when we start pitting them against each other, like saying one is better than the other. And for me, I walk that line like right in the middle where I'm like, man, I love really creative, artsy, fartsy kind of stuff. But I also like to get down and like fighting. I like guns. I like knives. I like stuff like that. And it freaks some other people out. And then they're like, well, wait, you also like this stuff? And I'm like, yeah, like what's wrong with that? And like you look at dudes like throughout history. I like the example of like King David in the Old Testament literature, who played a wicked harp, but then also destroyed bears and lions like with his hands and was like killing dudes and stuff. And then he would like sing and cry and be like a poet and stuff. Nobody's accusing that dude of being a wuss.
Yeah.
But like you have to reconcile those identities. And so like for me, as I got older, I was like, all right, I'm a metalhead, I'm a creative, I'm a warrior, and I was able to just functionally put all that together to be exactly who I need to be. And a lot of people aren't doing that. They're focusing in on society, and society is telling them exactly what they should be. And they get these false identities and they fall into these narratives, and then they just end up unhappy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, great points. The half of the business is logo design, graphic design, et cetera. What's the other half of the business, and what do you have going on / how can people get a hold of you?
Yeah. So, I originally, the way that I worked was geopolitics. Then I moved into mental health, and I was in a organization called Heart Support, which was founded by Jake Lors. He's the lead singer of August Burns Red. I was his executive director there. And basically, I took, when I eventually left that job, I realized like I wanted to help veterans and do keynote speaking and talk about like my expertise and experience, train businesses, entities, and organizations about like how can you hire veterans, how can you help veterans. So like I was just speaking in Denver to a mortgage brokerage insurance that was trying to help veterans through like their health insurance needs. And so talking about like the struggles and challenges that we face. So keynote speaking is probably about like 25%. I just spoke to QVC.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I was like, am I going to be on live TV, or you guys want me to like sell knives or something? They go, no, this is internal training. I was like, oh, okay, sweet. Yeah. Because at first I was like, this is bizarre. But and then I've done stuff on stage with like Tim Tebow and other keynote speakers. So and mine's coming from like the military perspective, and then also at the same time like challenging the civilian perspective and getting them to understand that side. But then also like not letting them shirk responsibility. Like a lot of them, people ask me these days, they're like, and I know what they're doing. They go, "Do you feel you fought for freedom overseas?" And I go, "Yes, but not in the way that you think." I go, I believe that I fought for your freedom to be completely aloof and enjoy all the comforts of home and know nothing about flag-draped coffins. There was no draft. I said, longest running wars in U.S. history, 20 years of war, back-to-back repeated deployments. And you guys wonder what's wrong with our veterans? Like, you just freaking sent them on like a bajillion missions, like where they had to do horrible things and you never had to hear about it. And you just got to go listen to like, hey, ya, and like have flushing toilets.
To me, a good response to that is, do you feel like you elected the right people to send us to war or not?
That's a great response.
Because it's a two-way street, right? It's like, well, who did you vote for, you know?
Yeah.
But anyway.
But back to the question at hand. So I do a lot of training. I'll work with veteran entities and organizations. I got my certifications in mental health so that I can help other people on individual one-to-one basis. And that's why I moved to Colorado Springs too, is I knew that I needed to be around military guys and help those through that process and transitioning out and working with the active duty side and talking about like geopolitical stuff. Web development, graphic design, that's about 50% of the business. And then writing, I work with, Scott Husing, who I've mentioned a couple times. We put together a company that it's called Solid Copy Media. We literally help veterans, military, first responders, and government executives tell their stories because, again, we believe that their stories are important and that they have a story to tell, especially after me telling you about like what my editor had brought up. Yeah. And so we want those stories to get told. And so we help them through the coaching process. So like, because most people don't know how to write books. They don't know the process. They don't know how to pitch an agent or find a literary agent or get a publishing house or anything of that nature. So writing is really the other portion. And then I ghostwrite a lot of books. So,
really?
So Where Cowards Go to Die has won 6 major literary awards now. And so once I started winning awards, people were like, hey man, will you write my book? So I can't tell you based on like NDAs, sure. But I ghostwrite books, and that's where a good chunk of money comes from.
Yeah, that's awesome. Just for my own personal files, if you want to call it that, one more time real quick. Can we get it'd be a lot cooler if you did.
It'd be a lot cooler if you did.
Dude, that's fucking great. Man, I love it. Man, fascinating, both story and individual. I've really enjoyed the honor of being able to interview you. I am very appreciative of, your brutal honesty. And to me, honesty doesn't have to be brutal, but in a lot of cases it is, in terms of what the truth actually is, can be brutal to hear. And I respect the hell out of the fact that you've included a lot of those brutal honesties in your book and in your story and not shied away from them, because I know most people don't. So thank you for coming, for carving the time out. Thank you for sharing your story. Again, Where Cowards Go to Die. And is there a website or anything that people can go to find you?
You can literally Google my name, Ben Sledge, Benjamin Sledge. Everything that pops up is me. You can
Sergeant fucking Sledge.
That's right. Go to benjaminsledge.com. You're going to find everything there. Yeah. My writing, my graphic design work, speeches, the whole nine, interviews, podcasts. So you'll be on there soon.
Yeah, awesome. Before we go here, do you have...
Ooh, baby.
Parting gift?
No, yes. I get another coin to add to my shadow
another
box.
Another coin, and then the box is from John Johnston and Champion Choice Silver. So
yes.
Next time you got your shit kickers on in Colorado
Oh my gosh,
Springs,
yes. This is going to look how good it
Yeah,
this
it already looks
awesome.
good. Yeah, amen. Good shit.
Yeah.
So thank you for coming. Hope you enjoy it. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I know, this is an important component. We haven't had any civil affairs guys on, and I think you can, through deductive reasoning, pretty easily ascertain how important that aspect of the military machine is overseas and what they do. It's an integral part and fascinating shit for sure. So hope you guys enjoyed it. If you didn't, you can choke yourself. And until next time, this is Mic Drop.